All right, welcome to today's episode of the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. You'll notice the name says Australian, so I invited someone from the UK who's currently living in New Zealand. So I don't know how that happened, Will. But welcome to the podcast. How you going?
Yes, good, thank you. Yep, thank you for the invite. Nice to be here.
Well, we connected on LinkedIn, and I've said in previous podcasts that LinkedIn is fast becoming one of my favorite social media platforms because I previously thought it was more like resumes and people just wanting to do stuff for business. But then there's people like yourself and a few others who talk a lot more nerdy and a lot deeper about some of the things they're doing. Like I love Instagram, right? But Instagram is kind of it's for the sexy photos. It's for the, and I didn't mean that in a literal sense. I meant in the gardening scene, and I realized that sounded a bit too sexual. But I meant like, look at these amazing hedges that we've cut, or look at this amazing lawn, and look at this beautiful floral, display at this garden. Yeah. Yes. Time lapses of people turning things from overgrown, and I love that stuff too. But then it's not really a platform for like really long written down, here's a nerdy science behind some stuff. Yep. I jumped on LinkedIn and I don't interact too much on there, but I saw your stuff and we connected, I believe, after we did the John Ledwidge podcast. And anyways, yeah, it's just you do a lot of really interesting things. And the reason I told you this off here, but for those who are listening, the reason why I asked you on is because I feel like your category of lawn care knowledge is like the Venn diagram crossover is very little because of the climates that you're from, what you do, blah, blah, blah. And that's what made me interested because I'm like, I'm really curious about stuff and I really want to learn from people who are doing different things. So that's why I asked you on. Anyways, how are you? And would you like to give us a brief introduction of what your role actually is? Because I realize I'm saying all that and people don't even know who you are.
No worries. Yep. So, I'm a turf agronomist for PGG Wrightson Turf. We're New Zealand. PGG Wrightson Seeds is a New Zealand company, well established seed breeding and supply company. Here in New Zealand, but we were relatively recently, acquired by DLF, who are a Danish, one of the biggest seed breeders, plant breeders, Danish company, and we've carried on working under the PGG Wrightson banner because the brand is so well known in New Zealand. It's meant that we can connect with a whole network, literally a global network of different researchers. In my position as a turf agronomist, I get to connect on a monthly basis with people doing some really cool stuff in Denmark, parts of America, maybe even South America, right the way through Asia. And they've got different people similar to me doing this kind of stuff. So it's opened up a big world of opportunity in terms of what we can develop here in New Zealand for the Oceania sector. And certainly some of the stuff, in the last year or so that I've been slowly and gradually kind of building on at Kimi here, which is our research center here in just outside of Christchurch, which is where those images on LinkedIn come from. A lot of that has come from conversations with colleagues from overseas who, and we share ideas essentially. And it's all about just trying to breed that part of my job, trying to help the companies breed better plants, better turf grasses.
Yeah. So you've got, so we did a podcast, I told you off air, but we did a podcast with Joe Rogers from Lawn Solutions Australia, and they do a very similar thing with obviously warm season grasses that would be grown from, like they import a pot with it in, they grow it out, probably stolonizing it like they're doing. So it's a different process, same, I guess, concept. What's the difference between, you got seeds, growing from seeds and growing from like a stolen or a live plant, how do you I guess not growing specifically, but what you're trying to do, which is I guess you would have a goal and you'd be like, I want to achieve more drought tolerance. I want to do this.
Yep.
Are you genetically manipulating the plant? Are you just, breeding it lots of times and hoping for the best? What's the process like with that?
Yeah, so it's crossbreeding. So we've got at Kimmy here. So as an agronomist, I score. I spend a lot of time for the company scoring different turfgrass varieties, running trials, turfgrass breeders trials over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, even more in some cases years, carrying out wear trials, drought tolerance trials, those sort of things. We've got a whole team behind us, with us, who are headed up by a gentleman called Dr. Alan Stewart, who's a Kiwi, but he's been a plant breeder.
But we'll forgive him. We'll forgive him for that,
Yeah. He's been
so
a plant breeder.
It says that you said it like it was like, oh, he's a Kiwi,
He's a Kiwi.
It's like,
he's a Kiwi too. We were talking the other day. He spent 6 years. I don't know how he totted it up, but he recently just thought it'd be a bit of fun to tot it up. So he spent 6 years of his life to date in hotel rooms around the world through visiting countries as far, he'll walk across places in mountain range in Jordan. He'll stop and look at berm, roadside berm somewhere in Denmark. And basically if he sees a plant, and for our purposes, a turf grass that's got that it's expressing itself in a particularly interesting way in an extreme environment, that's worth looking at. That's his whole, that's his passion, and he's a fantastic guy to have. What a resource, for someone like me, he's a grass nerd. Basically can go to him and ask him about, so what happened the time you crossed a tall fescue from Australia with a tall fescue from, I'm making this up, but Northern America, and so you're going back to your question. When we're breeding from seed, we're still breeding from plants, mature plants, but we're not genetically modifying, but those Alan and his team will select based upon expressions that they're noticing. So just say the easiest way to explain it is this year we're looking for a more drought tolerant ryegrass. So we're going to start looking at plots that are out there at the moment at Kimmy here on the research site, and we're going to start looking specifically at which ryegrasses are doing the best under extended heat and drought stress. And it won't be all. In fact, it may be none, or it might just be one, and that'll be a particular cultivar that then the plant breeding team will literally, they'll just take a sample of that, they'll separate that, they'll grow out in pots one part of that sample, and the other part of that sample they'll put into a polycross with it might be a brand name, if you like a Colosseum or a Soprano, an existing cultivar that's already performing well, but we're just trying to get that nth percent of improvement in drought tolerance or wear tolerance or whatever it is the characteristic we're trying to move forward. So I don't know if hopefully that answers it. I mean, that's essentially what we do. We, rather than taking a stolon and then cultivating that vegetatively, we're using seeds, mature grass plants and seeds, and we're forcing them to crossbreed and get the benefits of those cross genetics. So it can typically it takes 10 years. That process, if you said, if you said that grass is drought resistant, this grass I know is a beautiful deep blue, because most of the stadiums now want that kind of deep blue, dark ryegrass. We're going to cross those, and we're going to end up with a deep blue colored ryegrass that's really, really drought resistant. And it may happen. Chances are it won't happen, but even if it does, it's going to take us about a decade to know if it's happened. If it's
I interrupt this podcast with Will to tell you about a live event we got coming up very soon, March the 9th. Bloody chickens again. Every bloody time, I'll tell you what. Anyways, March the 9th. Brenton from the Aussie Lawn. Luke from Mow Master. Sean from Easy Flow, and yours truly, another Luke. 2 Lukes. Live event. You can do a meet and greet, have a little bit of food there, and then you can do a live podcast where you can ask the questions you want to ask. It's a last minute thing, so we're not expecting a massive crowd, which means you get more face-to-face time. But jump on the link, it's in the bio or in the description, whatever you call it these days. Also, we have talked about this before, Barricade is coming up to be the best time of the season to be applied right now in March. So jump on the lawn shed, grab some Barricade. It prevents weeds for 6 months. You might have heard me talk about it many times on the podcast. Incredibly safe herbicide. And when it comes to scheduling, you can't get safer for a herbicide that is scheduled. Anyways, let us get back into the podcast with Will. Well, how many times? Because I've known this from people I've talked to who say crossbreed, say like a philodendron behind me or something like that.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's a lot easier to do some of those varieties because you wait for it to flower, you know, and then you get some pollen from another one, and you just paint it on, or you touch the two plants together. You do something like that to pollinate the flower. I've seen turfgrass seeds, but I don't think I've ever seen turfgrass flowers. So how do you do that with turf, or am I just not looking close enough?
No, it's correct. But essentially, the turfgrass seed, so that we call it the inflorescence, when the turfgrass or the grass goes to seed, you get that seed head. That's essentially the flower. That's as much of a flower as you're going to get from a grass plant, if you like.
Yeah.
So it's when that seed, we're trying to mix that flower, that inflorescence, it goes to seed, and we mix those two. That's the point at where those two, be they different cultivars or different species, that's where we can get that. I was going to say interbreeding. That's the wrong term. Crossbreeding.
Yes,
that's where we can get the benefit of that crossbreeding, because then
don't make any interbreeding jokes being from New Zealand. The number of Australians that are going to be jumping on this right now. Let's just not talk about it, all right?
Yeah, wrong terminology, eh? That's where we get the benefit of that cross pollination. So it's exactly the same. It is essentially it's exactly the same as cross pollinating roses or what. Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert at all in that field, but I'm assuming it's exactly the same.
So how many times? Sorry, how many times do you have to do that? Because you're talking like 10 years. So I'm thinking like, I guess what it seems like the longevity of the process, just the slowness of it would be that you got to do it so many times and then test out those grass varieties for a while to even see if they're good, and then they're not good, so you got to do it again. So how many times do you have to interbreed? Like, is it a couple of hundred? Is it like, I don't know, like how many times?
It may be once. That's really unlikely, but how many times you have to do it is really hard. You're exactly right. That's what takes the time. If you get successful characteristics crossing between two cultivars from the first go, that's great. The time then is then maturing the offspring into a flowering turf grass, and then it's the multiplication. So it's the multiplication of having enough seed to one, that's going to tell you how high yielding that grass might be. So put it this way, it could be the most amazing grass variety the world's ever seen. Super grass, doesn't need water, hardly needs any nitrogen, but it doesn't yield enough seed. So it's not going to, straight away, unfortunately, we've got to kill it because it's not going to be commercially viable. We're not going to be able to grow enough.
True.
So that's the first. I guess that's the first major hurdle to cross.
I'll pause you there, because that's funny, because it's the opposite of what you want for a warm season grass, because you don't want seeds, because the seeds look ugly. So when you're like, we want more seeds, I'm like, what are you? Okay, it's strange, but no, it totally makes sense.
Yeah, that is. You're right. It's total opposite. So we're looking for we're treating grasses like a crop. You know, you want the yield, and the yield is the seed. So that's the first. Say you cross that bridge successfully, and it looks like it's going to yield enough. Then the rest of the time is not in any more cross pollination or crossbreeding of that grass. We've got the grass we want. We know it's going to yield to the levels we require, it's then in the R&D. So that's when, you know, people like myself would come in, and we'll start
Mm-hmm.
putting those grass species into trials, and then we typically run one at the minimum length of time we run one of those trials is 3 years. So we'll always run it for at least 3 years, because year one we may get a drought, year two we might get a lousy summer, year three we might get a really cold winter. So you're looking, the
True.
data the data on those trials only really becomes valuable with a as broad a cross section of seasons and environmental, or abiotic factors taken into account as possible. So straight away then you're almost into 5 or 6 years down the line, and this is from having a successful cross pollination in the grass that's awesome from day one. And then you've got to find people that want to grow it. So then we go out, or I don't, but the wider company then has to approach farmers. And for us, it's with brown tops. It's in the Canterbury region because we've got the soils and the climate that brown top seems to thrive on.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're locked in. Those farmers will be locked in for a set period of time. It might be 3 or 4 years, because they obviously need to justify their costs. So they have to have a contract, basically.
Yeah.
They don't want us to turn around in a year's time and say, actually, we've bred something better. We don't need that anymore. Because they're like, well,
Yeah.
I've set this aside for 3 years, mate. Now what am I going to do with it for the next 2 years? So
Yes.
it's a really, really long process, but it's also a very committed process. So that's why in cool season in particular, whole new, significantly new cultivars are quite few and far between. We're not sort of pumping them out 4, 5, 6 a year, or it's slow. It's a slow process. Every 2 or 3 years, a genuinely new novel cultivar will come out, that has a very different characteristic to anything that's perhaps gone before, and then that will go into things like your NTEP trials in the States, or your BSPB trials, or both, which are in the UK, run by the STRI. So they're the
Yep.
ones that really get you that international rating. So when those seed catalogs come out, and the distributors and the superintendents and the stadium managers are looking for their next great seed variety, that's the reference material they're basing a lot of those decisions on. And that's another 2 or 3 years before that comes out. So you can quickly see how, if it goes smoothly, 10 years is eaten up pretty quick.
Very quickly. Yeah.
And it's crazy, but it's fascinating at the same time.
Oh, totally. And I can also see how, how you said the farmer, so the farmers signed up for it, and then, like, say 2 weeks later, you come across some genetic freak in the lab, and you're like,
Yeah.
damn.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And
Yeah.
then, because I've had a conversation with a few brands on the podcast as well, people who make tools
Yep.
specifically. And I was talking to one brand about, like a certain, this is offline, and they were basically like, oh, that's going to be discontinued soon. That's going to be replaced soon,
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's funny because you still have to sell it to make money.
Yes.
It's kind of like when you get your Toyota Hilux or whatever like that, and you just like, I'm going to buy a Toyota Hilux, and you go, but if you know that in 6 months there's going to be a new one, you'd wait.
Would you? Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, I can wait 6 months. 2 years, no, I need one now. But it's like, that goes on all the time in industry. All sorts of products are getting updated all the time, and they don't want to talk about it. So you'd be in the same position where you'd be like, and they might be like, oh, this is so good, but it's like, well, it's better than average, but we actually have something else. But you're not going to tell them, are you?
Yeah, we'll get, because Kimmy here, the site I'm based at, it's a pretty cool site. So we get a lot of guys from the industry, from councils, from stadiums, from golf courses that, they drop in every now and again, and we do a bit of a walk and talk, and a bit of a tour. And it invariably ends up, we'll go out to the plots at some point, because that's what most people want to see, grass nerds, and get down there and just look like a bunch of nutters out in the middle of a paddock. And inevitably there'll be questions of, well, what's that one? I want that one. What's that one? I want that one. And
Yeah,
even, most of the time, to be honest, you try to score everything as blind and as objectively as you can. So a lot of the time we're just dealing with coded lines,
true.
TLP 22094, whatever it might be.
Yeah, yeah,
So, but we can always, if one's performing particularly well, you can absolutely find out what it is.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
sometimes you wish you hadn't, because you find out it's actually a successor to this one, which thankfully I'm not on the commercial team, but the commercial team's job is still, like, exactly like you said, to be out
Yeah,
there selling this one now as the latest and greatest. But in the background, we know that this one here
there's
is
something
way
better.
better. Yeah. Um, but
Do
yeah,
you
it's, I
ever?
mean,
So this is just how my brain works, right? Because I'm, the PL 17235, whatever codes. I'd probably name them after just random people, just to be fun.
could do that
I'd be
actually. That's
like,
not bad.
this one's Shirley Temple. We've got Arnold Schwarzenegger over there. We've got
This
Curtly Ambrose. Just random people, and I don't know,
yeah.
personify it a little bit. I guess that problem with that is it wouldn't be objective, because if somebody really
No,
likes
because
Shirley
it's
Temple,
attached to the name.
yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
hate that. There's
I hate
there
Arnold
is a there's
Schwarzenegger movies, and thus, even though the Lord is overperforming, it's I hate it.
there is quite a cool thing. So when eventually one of the coded lines makes it to a commercial, potential, if it's something that we've bred in house, in New Zealand here, we do have that privilege of. So normally the grass breeder, the person,
Mhm.
so someone like Alan, will get that privilege to be able to say, I want to call it. Oh, look, I don't know, whatever. We had a
Yes,
guy,
yes, yes.
called Keith Salisbury, who was a plant breeder for a long, long time with us, and
Yep.
the latest brown top bent that we've got out there to be commercialized is called Salisbury. So it's quite nice like that. It's a
Yes.
homage, to the person that spent their life, like I say, at least a decade trying to bring this
Yeah.
thing through. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so you can, but yeah, Arnie or something would be quite good. Yeah,
Well, you've been talking
Terminator.
about, so you're the guy who's doing part of this, and maybe one day you'll get the opportunity
Oh, who
to
knows?
name a turf variety. Have you thought about what you might actually call it?
No, no, not really.
It's getting
No,
ahead of yourself, isn't it? I reckon
yeah.
Shirley Temple would be what I'd go for, just considering this podcast. And people will be like, there must be some meaning behind it. And you'll be like, there is, but I'll never tell you. The meaning
Yes,
is that I
mysterious.
randomly brought it up. Yeah, it's like this. It might be the best turf grass of all time, and people just assume that it's something to do with Shirley Temple. It's,
Yeah,
you know,
and they've all got to ask Shirley Temple. Ah,
yeah. Actually, you might have a copyright infringement or something like that. Anyways,
oh, true. Elvis.
anyway,
Yeah.
you get the idea. I don't even know why Shirley Temple is. Who knows? I haven't thought about her in as long. I don't even know. I'm just googling her now, thinking Schwarzenegger makes sense. But look, anyways, let's move on from that. So
Why
how
was
many
she?
times? What was that?
Why was she front of mind when we were having that conversation? Yeah.
No idea. That might be a Freudian slip that I'm still not aware about of what actually slipped there. You get some weird dreams sometimes. Anyways, before this goes completely off the rails, the so you talked a lot about the process. So you talked about how you might be lucky at one time in
Yep.
terms of, like, you just breed it, and the first time it's the bee's knees, the duck's nuts. Reminded me of this story I heard this week. I was watching a YouTuber, an archaeologist YouTuber, and he was telling the story of a guy who they used to excavate grave sites, and these graves more like tombs, more like tomb sites. And what would happen is these families back in the day would have a tomb,
Hmm.
and it would be like a plot of land. It would be like, that's your tomb. And over years, what they would actually do is they would bury somebody in the tomb and then move everything to the back when the next person died, and put the next person in and move everything to the back. So you had a respectful place to bury people. And don't worry, this is going to relate to what you do eventually, right? You're like, where is this going? We'll get there. But this so he's telling this story, and so what would happen is, over a long period of time, there would be these tombs that were filled with, obviously, bones, and remains, but also they'd bury some people with valuable possessions, as I don't know. I don't know if it had anything to do with the afterlife, or it was just they really liked this thing, so he buried them with him. So what would happen is there would be tomb robbers or grave robbers that would come many, many, many years later, and steal stuff out of sight. So these archaeologists, the best thing you could ever find would be an untouched grave, because there's so much history and there's different. Anyways, what happened is this guy, famous archaeologist, is in a cave once, and they go in there, and there's some stuff in there, but it's all been gone. It looks like it's been stolen, So they go, yeah, damn it. Okay, move on. And they thought it was a good find. It wasn't. So he's got this young kid. I think he's a high school kid. I think they brought out some kids who were interested in to do the laboring. And he's like, look, just go check a couple of things. And anyway, so this kid's a naughty kid, right? And he actually gave him the job, because I think his name was Nathan. And he gave him the job because he found him frustrating. So he gave him the stupid job, right? And this kid is being naughty, and he's curious. So he just starts digging in his grave. And then, anyways, 10 minutes goes by, and he comes out with 2 jars, right? And he just taps on the guy, turns around, and he's holding 2 jars full of stuff. And the guy's like, what the hell are you doing? Blah, blah. Because he's like, well, you don't drop him. Like, where did you find these? What the heck? What had actually happened is they worked it out. The roof of the cave had collapsed and covered all the great possessions. So and this is 2,500 years, right? Old cave.
Yeah.
So for 2,500 years, everybody had walked in and gone, oh, this has already been robbed. And they moved on to the next one. And it was the best archaeological find of this guy's 70-year-long career.
Yeah.
And it was because of a naughty brat kid not following instructions. Yeah. And anyways, he tells the story, and he's so torn about it because his own sort of arrogance to move on too quickly and frustration at the kid who brought it through. I'm wondering, has anything ever like that happened in turf breeding, where some random intern puts 2 things together and they find the amazing turf variety first try, they get to name it and they get all the amazing rice. There's this guy's been doing it for 50 years who doesn't ever come close. It's just luck of the draw.
Yeah. Probably, mind you, looking at the age of most of our grass breeders, no.
They're not that old, are they?
Oh no, you have to. Yeah, they've all had like 30, 40 plus year careers with us, so yeah, they're fully committed. So that would hurt. That would really hurt. Yeah, because they
Can
may.
You imagine? Yes.
Yeah, honestly, you might get one. Well, like I mentioned, the previous guy, he'd had about a 40-year career, and yeah, we've just released a brown top bent in honor, if you like, of him. So yeah. If that ever happened, I bet it's happened in the States.
But you just feel like it'd be so torn, like this guy was. I mean, they ended up excavating the whole cave tomb, and it was full of stuff. And they found like silver scrolls and writing and all kind of like. And I was really into it. Like the silver scrolls, like there's a couple of credit card size together, not like a literal, but like all this stuff and pottery and this and that, and just amazing stuff from back in the day. And just some kid. But so obviously the guy still got the pleasure of finding and unearthing everything else. But it is funny how that works sometimes. And yeah, it'd be such a torn thing, because your goal is to find a great variety, which you found, but you don't get to say that you're the person who joined the 2 things at the crucial moment when it mattered,
Yeah, at the origin. Yeah. No, and I haven't experienced that yet, but I know people that have done this role before me have, where you do get the grass breeders super excited about something. It's all looking amazing. Goes into the turf trials with us, the turf agronomy team, for that 3 years, and it just doesn't cut it. Everything else up to that point's been absolutely perfect, and it just doesn't cut
Ah,
it. And then you're a kind of dream destroyer. Yeah,
yep. You got
that's
to tell
tough.
him Shirley Temple's not doing too well.
He's
Sorry,
not going to make it.
Schwarzenegger's
No,
Schwarzenegger's. He's not as buff as he used to be. All right. Because
no.
I was going
Doesn't
to
like
ask
walking.
you about the process, right? Because there's two things going on. One is I grow a lot of plants in this warehouse, and the warehouse conditions are perfect for like
Mm,
forest, plants, typical indoor plants, because there's the filtered light from the what do you call it, the plastic opening. You know what I mean? You
yep.
get the metal roof and you get the plastics bits that let
Diffuse
the
light.
light in.
Yep.
But so perfect growing conditions. I've got a bunch of plants on a 3.5 meter tall, what do you call it, Dexion racking unit, and it's so hot up there, but it's not direct sunlight, so it's like proper forest conditions. You know what I mean? Like
Ideal.
it's so.
Yep.
So for those plants, it's perfect. And one of the things I've been thinking about is, and I've tried to do this once before, is grow some varieties of lawn for people who work for us to,
Mm,
so say like you'd have a zoysia, a kikuyu, a buffalo, and a cooch.
mm-hmm.
And I tried that, and it didn't really work. And it's like the amount of light, because I was adding artificial light to it and stuff,
Yeah.
but it's just like the light, the conditions. I think I started getting like root rot because the pot was only 30 centimeters deep, and it's too cool, and there's no wind, and so I got fungal diseases, and so you get all these problems growing indoors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. But I wonder, like, because you talked about how long it takes. If you had, like, money was not an object, could
Mm,
you make an indoor facility that could perfectly replicate seasons, and
mm,
then you could make it so that the 10-year process becomes a 6-year process? Is
mm.
that possible to do? Again, like, is there technology there? Do you feel like that would work, or at the end of the day, do you just need to put things outside?
Yeah, like in theory, yeah, like you could. We could certainly. I mean, most of the stuff we do around trial stuff anyway, that's over and above just looking and observing. Things like wear, um, drought. We turn the water down.
Yep.
Uh, Fertilization, those sort of things. They're artificial inputs anyway that we're simulating. Um, so yes, if we and there is the technology there that if you had an unlimited budget and you could put the resource into it, you could create this amazing R&D facility that's controlled environment, just like all the things you've just sort of mentioned. Um, you need the only thing is you always do need the unpredictability of nature, Mother Nature, and the environment to be 100% sure that what you're supplying ultimately, commercially, is actually up to scratch. So,
Yep.
what we typically get in my previous life as a consultant, I would do quite a lot of laboratory testing on things, very controlled environment testing, and that always comes with that quite
Yes.
significant caveat that in a laboratory you see it coming out of the States all the time on the research, caveat at the bottom, this was a controlled laboratory test. So
Yeah.
I think, yes, in theory, definitely, and it would be a really cool place to work. But in reality, I think we're always, and especially now with the climate seemingly becoming more and more volatile and extreme, we
Yep.
need to we need to stress these, in our case, turf varieties under those extreme conditions, and that only comes with years. Going back to what I said about a minimum of 3 years, you could probably argue where you should be trying for 5 years because,
20.
you know, yeah, well,
100.
yeah, yeah. And to be honest, okay, the trial's over after 3 years, but when the product's out there, and industry will make its mind up over the next 2, 3, 4+ years on top of that. And um, yeah, it never really and truly, the trialing never really stops, does it? Because you're constantly getting feedback. Like our commercial guys will be getting feedback from the field. They're out there as technical reps. They're on the, literally on the front line of it. And
Mhm.
yeah, that the consumer's not interested in the last decade of turfgrass breeding that's gone into this particular perennial ryegrass or brown top. They're only interested in what it's looking like now after it's established on my golf green or in my stadium.
Mhm.
And they're very quick, and fair enough. They've spent money on it. They're very quick to offer both positive and negative feedback on that. So it's still under trial, even when it's out there. So it would be really challenging to replicate every little nuance of environmental stress that the plant's going to come under in its lifetime.
Mm.
Inside, like, because we haven't even got on to stadiums, and stadiums are just, they're just a whole other level of punishment. It's like
Yeah.
you talked about light. Yeah, there's just no
Yeah.
light. So, yeah, that's a whole other topic.
Well, you talk about the unpredictability. I know how you could make an indoor controlled environment unpredictable, right? Every Wednesday, just bring my kids in, all right, and let
Same.
my 1.5 and 3-year-old just have their way with the dials.
Yep, randomize it. Yep.
I had my daughter at the warehouse yesterday, and there's a vacuum cleaner, and it's got a big red button on top for on and off, right? And it wasn't plugged in; it wasn't even connected. And she was just going and flicking it back and forth because it had quite a big click noise. I didn't care. I was
Nice.
like, whatever. Yeah, have fun. And anyways, and later on I had to plug it in. I was like, is it off or is it on? Here's the rule, mate. I was like, I reckon it's on. Plugged in, it's on.
Yeah.
So I had to go unplug it, turn it off, plug it back in. But it's like,
50.
yeah, all the crazy stuff, whenever they're here, it's like the roller door, I'm not allowed to just open the roller door. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, because
Yeah.
they want to press the button, and the disappointment if I press the button.
Yeah.
know?
Truly,
But I
actually,
reckon,
yeah. A toddler destruction test should be brought into. Yep.
exactly, yeah.
Yep.
And all the turf grass guys who are buying it, they're like,
Yeah.
you're into the sales guys. They're like, how resilient is this? Like, do you have kids? Yes. Well, you will trust me now. We had 2 or 3 toddlers. The superintendent's like, say no more.
Yeah. Yeah.
I understand. All the single guys like, I don't know, man. Like, what are you talking about? Oh, man.
No,
Talking about
it
the
is hard.
resilience and
Yeah.
stuff, and coming to a serious note on this is, do you think it's possible, like, say, given enough time, that you could get ryegrass to be as resilient as a couch, like as drought tolerant? Because like,
Mm.
where is the limit on this? Because that would be epic. I actually have last week. So we do work at a private school,
Mm.
and I so in the school holidays last week was the start of school for us. And so the school
Mhm.
wants their lawn looking amazing. Now, on one of the days, I had to mow a very specific small section. There was tree loppers cutting the tree next to it, right? I've told you about our insane heat that we're going to have. Last week was basically
Yeah.
the same temperature, right? So we had a big heat wave last week. So that's the week all the kids are coming back, right? The cut before I missed this section because of the tree loppers. And under the tree, I've actually put ryegrass to mix. There's a little bit of buffalo, but it's mostly kaiku and ryegrass for the shade. And anyway, so the grass was long. Well, it was, I don't know, probably 10 centimeters, would say, and usually I'd cut it at 3.5 in that section, right? So I got to cut a lot off because I missed a cut, and it's super hot. And I didn't realize this, but there's these guys coming in to clean the sand pits just before school, and they go to the ground, the general maintenance guy. Oh, can you turn off the sprinklers so that it's not wet?
Yep.
So the guy turns off the sprinklers, and the kaiku and the cooch, they look a little sad because they've missed a watering day. The ryegrass is like, what are you doing to me? So I then go cut this ryegrass, right? And drive over it, obviously with a ride-on lawnmower. I come back, the kikuyu next to it is fine. It's greened up. It's fine. It can handle that cut. The ryegrass is dead, right? There's patches of it, and you can see the wheel marks. The wheel marks crushed that last little bit of life. It was not much water being missed, and one aggressive cut in a really hot week, and the ryegrass was gone. But I mean, luckily it was just small little patches. The school understands whatever. It's like, I'm probably talking about a total of maybe 3 square meters of lawn spread over a 15 square meter area,
Yeah.
But ryegrass looks so good, and it's just it stripes up so well. There's that thick uniformity to it. It doesn't get thatchy like stoloniferous grasses do. Do you like how I used a big word there? Made myself look smart.
Professional.
Yeah, exactly. So so there's so many benefits to ryegrass, and if you had the perfect climate for it, you get those sort of transitional climates. And the debate in your world is often, is it cooch or is it rye?
Yep.
For that kind of transitional, do you suffer with the heat in summer with the rye, or do you suffer with the lack of color for cooch in winter and the lack of wear? So could you get it so that ryegrass did everything? Because I think if you could, you could, and you named that one, everybody, no one would ever forget you, would they?
Persistence.
But do you think it's possible, or am I being a little bit too optimistic?
In your climate, nah.
Damn.
Yeah, no. Where I came from, obviously up in the UK, for the first, the first 20 years of my the first good decade of my interest in turf and playing golf courses and sports and different soccer, everything. I only knew ryegrass. That ryegrass, there's only one type of grass.
Nothing else exists.
Exactly. Nothing else exists. I mean, because then you get into it and there's poa and stuff, but you don't really look. It's just ryegrass. Everything's ryegrass.
Yes.
And so predictably, yes, in the UK and those sort of countries, and those those zones, northern zones, definitely. But no, like coming to Auckland, where I first came to from the UK, the learning curve was massive. Obviously, we're not getting 40-degree days, but you get a 26. Sounds like nothing. You get a 26-degree day in Auckland with 80, 90 odd % humidity, and the UV huge that we get, and it's disgusting. It's like, it's Fiji, and you can't grow ryegrass. You can't keep the ryegrass within, just like you described there, in a typical sports field situation. Not stadium, but a typical sort of contractor run situation. Ryegrass will fall over in a couple of days of that, if you're lucky. And that's if you can keep water on it. If you can't keep water on it, like happened there with you, gone, just crisps up. And the trouble, and I'm not saying that something like a fescue or a brown top bent would be the way to go, because it absolutely wouldn't. But what we do see with the heat tolerance with the fescues and the brown tops is that they will look dead, but they're dormant. And then when the first rain of autumn comes or whatever, it flushes. I saw a really good years and years ago. I don't know if you remember it, or if you're even into golf particularly, but there was a British Open where Tiger Woods, he didn't take anything. He didn't take a driver. He didn't take a wood off any. Not one single tee. I think he didn't even use a wood for the whole tournament. He won it, of course. It was when he was in his heyday.
Oh yeah, back then.
Yeah. I might be wrong. May have been Royal Liverpool, but anyway, it was dust. It was powder dust that year. That links, absolute, like literally every time he hit. I just remember watching it, and every time he'd hit an iron, it would just be. There were shots where he had to back away, and there's just a cloud of dust covering his face. And then, so that was bone dry. Everything looked dead. And my dad, who's not a golfer, not a turfie, well, that's dead. Going to have to he was a farmer. He's like, they're going to have to reseed all that because that's just dead. And then they went back about 2 months later to do a bit of an interview with the super, and like, how do you recover from that, and etc. This was a turf program.
Yes.
It's on YouTube, and it was green. And they're like, so you must have put in, how much seed did you put in across the course? None. We did a bit of interseeding where there was, where the walkways are, because that's dead, that's gone. But tea to green, all that, and that's fine fescue. And the majority of that was fine fescue and maybe some brown top. It was dormant. It wasn't dead. It was dormant. So, and it was just unreal, and hardly any fur as well. That was just the nitrogen in the rain had brought that back, the goodness of the
Right.
rainfall. And you don't. And my point is, you don't even get that with ryegrass. Once it's dead, it's dead. It's gone.
Yeah.
It's not gone dormant. It's not coming back. It's essentially it's dead. So yeah, I can never see. All we're chasing now with ryegrass breeding is 1%ers. There's different lists around the world. There's an A list for ryegrasses now where we're
Right.
breeding them for drought tolerance. I think you do it in Australia. It's becoming really popular with tall fescues in Australia, and it's all about you get a certification on that bag of seed that says it can perform with 40% less water than your normal lawn situation. It's mostly around residential turf grasses, and I can see us chasing that more and more with ryegrasses, because those darker, bluer ryegrasses that come out of the American states, absolutely, they're kind of shut down and they stop growing, but they hold on and they're quite tough. And then the disadvantage with those is when the winter comes, they don't like it. They don't recover quick enough. So then we use what we call a Mediterranean ryegrass to come in, and that one will tend to have more of that activity that we need in the cooler months. So it's kind of, you're almost at a high level. A lot of those stadium guys will be interseeding different ryegrass cultivars, not just between warm and cool season. They'll just be using different ryegrass cultivars at different times of the year to promote seasonal growth for the different codes. So
is it possible to because we had a professor on when we were talking about this is quite a while ago, but we did a podcast on glyphosate, and we talked about genetically modifying plants. And he was in agriculture and like the food and stuff like that. And so this is a very limited knowledge I know about genetically modifying, but he talked about like how they would fire genes into the gene sequence with a gun, right? And I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. And that's how they get it working. And I was like, I wonder if you could take, between grasses, because they still are in the same, what group? What's it called? Phylum, or whatever. Yeah, whatever. I don't know. See, you're the scientist. I'm the podcaster. I'm the pretty face in this podcast. You know what I mean?
No, I won't argue.
People who are listening have no idea what the joke is. But look, what I was going to say, I wonder if you could hypothetically fire the drought resistance. So cut out all the processes, and even use artificial intelligence. See, this is this is where my brain goes. Could you get like a computer to use artificial intelligence to run a simulator to be like, well, this is what we think. If we take this from, this fescue, and we take this from this brown top, and we take this from a rye, and we fire them all together, and can we get a frankincense rye that has the color of rye but the resilience of this? And then and you just put it all together, because I would think that there would be a limit, because you would have to have a certain level of closeness in how the plants are related, and it would like you couldn't cut an arm off a monkey and stitch it onto a frog, and be like, well, they're both animals, should work. Like even with transplants in humans and stuff like that. So anyway, I'm verbally processing here, but I wonder if that's possible to do. Like, has anybody done that?
Not that I'm aware of, but I don't see why not. Yeah, it's like if there was a will to do it, you could definitely start using, and they will be, and we kind of are in a very basic way, but you could definitely start using AI to speed up. This goes back to what we were saying at the start. Speeding up trials to reduce that
Yep.
10-year period, say, as a number. We are, as an industry, we're using more and more AI. We're just such a small industry globally.
Yeah.
Turf. It's so we follow on the coattails of agriculture, and then agriculture has it for 10, 15 years, and then it starts to trickle down into horticulture and maybe turf then. And
Yeah.
then, and agriculture, absolutely, as we, that's going that way. So no, there's no reason why not. But
See, what would be epic would be, because like you get hobbyists who will, like we talked about with the philodendrons or whatever, or roses or whatever, will interbreed. I keep using interbreed. Now that you've said it, crossbreed. Anyways, this ain't no hillbilly podcast. When we talk about crossbreeding, like roses or whatever, something with a flower, wouldn't it be cool one day if you could have like a basic genetic modifying thing and do your own gene sequencing or whatever the word is, like a little device, your own little gun, your own little gene modification AK-47 that you fire the genes into. I mean, who knows what the possibility is? Because then you would have all these random hobbyists who would be like, I'm going to make the most drought resilient tomato the world's ever seen. I'm going to make a dwarf, I don't know, oak tree or something for my bonsai. They're gonna, like, people who have that, they're gonna be like, I'm gonna make the weirdest, stupidest, but it'll be so fun. And then but then also you have people who would make, actually no, this is bad, they make foods poisonous that shouldn't be poisonous, wouldn't they? See, now I've ruined my own idea. It was so fun.
If only Elon Musk was into gardening, eh?
True. I mean, I'd have him on the podcast. That's for sure. But yeah, I mean, except for those people who would ruin it and like make a banana poisonous, and then it looks, and then that's Snow White all over, isn't it?
It's dangerous stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Other than that side of it, that would be fun. And then your job, you could, in a week, you could do whatever you wanted in a career.
Yeah.
Try next one, There we go. That's the path you should be heading down, I reckon. But you know what? At the end of the day, Will, I don't want to be rude or disrespectful to your entire industry, but why even have turf when you can get AstroTurf? What's even the point?
Yeah.
All these efforts you put in, and you can just put in some plastic stuff. I mean, what's the deal with that?
Eco-friendly.
We'll talk about this offline. So you're in this industry, you're talking about AstroTurf, and a lot of people think that AstroTurf is environmentally friendly because it's not using water. But you look into it deeper, and there are a lot of problems, a lot of different problems with AstroTurf. And people are getting sold a lie if you can understand it in certain situations, like maybe there's not enough light and it's a backyard courtyard and you want something green and your options are paving or AstroTurf. Like, that's different. But people ripping out natural grass, what's the problem with that environmentally that people actually know about?
I think absolutely artificial turf has a place, and it probably has a place where you're looking more at a school or a community that's just over, way too many kids or way too many different codes and sports clubs want to use this one field and it's getting smashed. And I get it in those situations, like a sports hub or something like that. There's definitely a place. But where I have a concern is that the general public, if you like, in a residential setting, the general public is being are not being made aware of what happens to that product. One, in its development, so the carbon footprint of its development, how it's got to being what it is before it's rolled out onto your backyard. And two, at some point, so you get a lot of people saying, oh yeah, but we can repurpose it, we can use it for footpaths, we can use it for X, we can use it for Y. At some point, that plastic is going to have to go back in to the environment somewhere, and it's invariably going to be landfill, and it
Mm-hmm.
will not break down. And yes, I know now there are companies on a massive scale doing some good things around shredding it, taking out the rubber. This is more for sports fields, taking out the rubber crumb, reusing that, using
Yeah.
that plastic from the fibers to make new fields. That's, I guess, we have to do that if it's going to have any future. We have to have those processes in place to make it somewhat. It's not sustainable, but somewhat.
No, it's not the right word.
Yeah, not such an environmental, negative impact. I don't want to catastrophize it either, because it's not, like I say, there is a place, but seeing new subdivisions, and we're part of one here. You walk the dog around and you see it, where people have literally just ripped out natural soil turf systems and put in place artificial turf. Yes, it's jarring, and not just the aesthetic. I don't like the aesthetic, but that's personal
Yeah,
preference. It's
neither do
fine.
I. Like yeah. Anyway, yeah.
It's the heat as well. It's the stormwater. I know stormwater engineers. We've spoken about it in the past. They're not fans of it, because you don't get the infiltration in those
Yeah.
systems that you do with natural soil. You've got no natural soil ecosystem. This is above and beyond anything to do with what you're going to do with it once it's knackered. And yeah, where it hurts is the wrong word, but it kind of does hurt me as a turfie, I guess, is where you hear adverts on the radio saying, if you literally describing this as eco grass, like literally, that's not my words. I've heard it marketed as eco lawn, eco grass.
Yeah.
And that's just not right. That's just not, I don't see any world where that's right. That's incorrect marketing, or lazy marketing. I don't know what you'd call that. I'm not a marketer, but there needs to be, there probably ultimately needs to be some regulation around it. And I think in some countries they're already, certainly up in Europe, and I might be wrong, but I think in parts of America, obviously it's all sort of state by state over there, but there is some regulation coming in on how many square meters per subdivision of this stuff can actually go in.
Yeah.
And what is happening to it when its time is up. Put it this way: if we bought this place and my backyard was covered in, artificial turf,
Yeah.
I don't want it. And what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I don't want it, so I'm going to get rid of it, and I'm going to put in natural turf eventually. I've got to do something with this. It's putting an issue in someone else's hands as well. You're not going to not buy the house because the yard's been turfed in artificial plastic, but there's a legacy issue as well. So it's it's a really difficult one. I can see the benefits, as I say, in certain high use situations, but residentially, I just don't feel it should ever have gone down that. Ideally, it would never have gone down that route, but it has now. So yeah, no, not a fan. Not a fan at all.
Well, I was just Googling while you were talking. I didn't get an answer, and I can't do two things at once, so I can't Google too hard. But I'm wondering. I've seen videos before about how much water it takes to make a bottle that holds the water. And I can't remember what it was, but it was very surprising to me. So you go to, everybody knows I love a bit of Pepsi Max. If I go buy a Pepsi Max, right, it's like, say, 600 mils. It might have been 3 or 4 times. Actually, I'll type that in. How much water does it take to make a water bottle? It was a lot. It takes 3 liters of water and 1 liter of oil to produce a 1 liter bottle. So 1 liter of bottled water. So that would probably include the 1 liter in the actual bottle. And I'm just going to look to see if that's like a proper, like a reusable water bottle or a waste one. Scrolling through quickly the photos that they've got of like waste. So that might be like your classic cheap one that you're getting down. So 3 liters of water for a 1 liter bottle. So probably 2 liters, double the amount of water
Yep.
it holds, I'm guessing, and oil and things like that.
Yep.
So I'm in my head, because the thing that people get wrong, right, about water. So you're talking about the landfill problem, right?
Mm.
But there's 2 other things that you touched on very briefly. But when you talk about water, because in WA we have water restrictions.
Yeah,
Obviously, where you've grown up your whole life, that you get this thing called rain. Like I made a joke. We actually had rain 3 days ago for honestly about 3 minutes, and I went outside and filmed it and pretended I was like in the Bible, it was like a miracle,
It's like snow.
I put it put it in my Instagram stories, and I got quite a few people laughing at it because anyway. But so we have water restrictions, and so people will put in AstroTurf because it's seen as water saving. I wonder how much water goes into producing it, how much we get that. But then what you said is the drainage stuff, right? Where does water go? I know this to a degree, but if you were to irrigate some lawn, typically it's just going to flow through down to an aquifer eventually, right?
Yeah, eventually, or into the, certainly now with the newer subdivisions, there's infrastructure there that's there's stormwater lines that capture it. So yes, eventually it finds its lowest
So
route of
does
resistance
stormwater always go to like rivers and streams and eventually to the ocean?
Eventually, yeah.
So you would think that water that got seeped through a lawn would reach an aquifer probably a little bit more than water that went through stormwater, I'm guessing. I mean, this is now touching into civil engineering, which neither of us are.
No, yeah. And then how compact is the lawn? Yeah. Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Typically, yeah. Like I know. Going back to this conversation I'd had with a stormwater engineer on it, because this was around using golf courses as green filters for cities. That's what we were talking about, and it got on to, well, when we design a subdivision now, we have to legally have so many square meters of lawn. He didn't say lawn, but berm or turf, soil, natural soil.
Yes.
To achieve the infiltration rates we need to get consent. They can't even get consent for that subdivision if too much of it is hard surface and going to go and then inundate the stormwater lines, and then they blow out, and you end up with you end up with wastewater meeting stormwater and all sorts of. We get it quite often, especially poor old Wellington at the moment over here gets it quite often. So there's laws now in place for design engineers when they're designing these subdivisions that they have to achieve X amount of vertical, if you like, it's soil infiltration, and the only way you can do that is to have so much green space that accepts the water. So that's why actually in a lot of berms now we have rain garden subdivisions now, rather than those grass berms, we have rain gardens. And so because the amount of water, because our climates or the way rain falls everywhere else in the world apart from Perth, the way
and
rain
the Sahara
falls,
Desert, the 2 places. That's it.
we need to deal with it quicker, and so so even arguably even these traditional lawns and berms aren't necessarily quick efficient enough. But if you're covering something, and I know they drain, but if you're covering something in plastic, and normally you've put metal under there and you've whacked it down, and it's got builder's sand as well.
It doesn't drain like a healthy turf would, one that you've aerated and you put wetting agents down, you're trying to get it to grow. Because what I'm thinking in my head is like, because you're using water, but if the water just ends up back in an aquifer, right? Or let's say I'm making up some numbers here. Let's say 20% is lost to evaporation, 20% goes down the drain and ends up in the ocean, and 60% goes to an aquifer. Completely made up numbers, compared to say 20% going to an aquifer and 80% evaporating or going to the ocean through the river systems. Like, it's not the same as, you're not using water, you're reusing water. You know what I mean? Like, there's 60% of it is actually not being lost. It's
Yep.
eventually going to get back into the system. And I've been thinking about this year because it's the first time this year. So in Perth, you have water restrictions that allow you to do 10 millimeter waterings per week. If
Right.
you are on scheme water. If you have a bore in certain areas, you can do it 3 times a week, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's certain places that might have basically unrestricted watering because it's a public place or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But they're very few and far between. So we recommended to our clients 2 weeks ago because of the insane heat. First time in 10 and a half years of business that we said we think you should put on a third day. Right? It's just 20 millimeters of water a week, and the evaporation rate is through the roof. It's just not enough. Now, some of our clients, surprisingly, their lawns are amazing still, and some of them are horrible because of the soil quality and how long they've been on our programs and things like that. But anyway, it's a complicated thing. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, it's not, if it's going back into an aquifer, I wonder how much is actually being lost. So, big picture, step back and look at the artificial turf. How much is being used to create the turf, to create and transport all the cracker dust and stuff like that? Because if you lived in a place where the soil was good, you could just put down some seed and that's it. Like if in your area, Perth, not so much. We we have sand. Anyways, but you can think of like there's definitely an argument that in perfect scenarios, in places like Europe, America, or even tropical areas, we can throw some stolons out and just make it work. You could basically turf an area for almost no environmental cost to start with, and then you have to water it, and most of that water just goes back into the aquifer. In my head, at least, we need to check that out. But then, yeah, you get the idea. Like the AstroTurf is using so much to produce. How long does it have to be down there before it actually gets into the positive?
Longer than it lasts. So I mean, there'll be arguments for that, against that. I know, but certainly, put it this way: like the reason. So I'll go back to just that sports turf example. The reason why you might put or you would put artificial soccer pitch or rugby training field, whatever it might be, in a sports hub, is because it's getting hammered. That resource is getting hammered. It's day and night. They got floodlights. It's 12 hours a day sport on it all the time. So you need to, just natural turf can't do it. I get that. So we go for artificial turf. Under those conditions, or use, I should say, you could never expect, honestly, if that was well maintained and as per guidelines all the way through its life, 10 years you'd be doing well to get 10 years out of that system. Then that gets taken up, rolled up. Yeah, like I say, who knows? Hopefully it gets reused somewhere, but who knows? It's got to go somewhere, and then new turf will get put down. So 10 years is not long enough. Is not long enough to pay back, if you like, I don't believe, the environmental footprint that's being created from manufacturing it, importing it, because it's not made here, and then, even though, it's really cool that there are now some companies recycling this stuff on a big scale, it's also got to be washed, processed, transported, the other end as well. So you're double dipping on all those costs, and in a world of carbon footprint rating, and honestly,
you would think that you'd think that water that was washing something like an AstroTurf would be somewhat toxic after as well. You've
got to be careful. I mean, the infills now are pretty good; they're pretty clean. But
yeah, you know what I mean. Like I'm talking more about like the difference between water that went through a turf into the aquifer is probably the cleanest you can get. Obviously, other than the silt and stuff it picks up in the ground, but there's no chemicals. It's not picking up chemicals, But so here's one of the things that talking about chemicals. I used to work before I started my business for the Department of Education here. I used to work for schools here, and it was not allowed to have AstroTurf in schools for 2 reasons. One is the temperature and potential to burn kids, and the second reason was that turf has a degree of being self-cleaning because of bugs and things like that. So if a dog came and chucked a dump on the oval, you could scoop that up, and there might be a tiny bit left on the turf that you can't really see microscopically, but organisms will break that down.
Yeah.
You put that on AstroTurf and 30 degrees. Like, I've got a photo here of that we put up ages. I was going to put up ages ago when you were talking about the heat, but I forgot. Let me put it on the screen now. This photo here is of AstroTurf on the same day. It's 35-degree ambient temperature, but the lawn is 33 degrees and the AstroTurf is 65 degrees. It's added 30 degrees of temperature. And I looked at this, and this is many years ago. Will, you seem like a smart man, so I think you'll agree with me. Kebabs are very nice to eat, right? Like a good old kebab. I looked at temperature that the kebab cooking thing is, and they're trying to get it to around like 80, 70, 80 degrees to cook, to maintain the temperature of the meat so that you don't get the bacteria getting worse and all that sort of stuff. So then you've got this middle ground of temperatures where it's like perfect breeding ground. So if it's not hot enough, it actually becomes the perfect breeding ground for bacteria. So obviously on this very, very hot day, and it gets hotter than that, it's probably cooking the bacteria. But there would be days, normal weather days, where that AstroTurf is probably right in that bacteria reproducing thing. And I'm not just saying that because that's basically what they said as to why they wouldn't allow it, because they didn't want a bird to do a dropping, a dog to do a dropping on this AstroTurf, or maybe like some kids spilled some dairy products like yogurt or something, and then that becomes infectious, and somebody falls and scuffs their knee. For whatever reason, they were just like, no, paving, concrete, do something else, but no AstroTurf. So that's another rabbit trail. All the chemicals and stuff you're putting in the soil, the lack of those chemicals, or even naturally, like feces and things like that aren't being broken down by organisms. There's a lot to it.
Yep. No, they're actually absorbing heat. That one where it says 65 degrees, that'll be absorbing heat from the asphalt next to it. It'll be coming through the backing, and exact opposite effect of and it literally is a cooling system. I mean, I don't know what the temperature. So the temperature. So did you say the ambient temperature was about 30 degrees on those
35?
Days?
35. It was 35. So cool.
Yeah. So the turf is cooling, and you can get I've got a pretty cool little thing. It's about, I can't remember what it costs now, but it's not. It's an affordable little gadget called a FLIR camera that you stick onto the bottom of your smartphone, and we use it for the trials, and it gives you a thermal image. Of the trial. So you can get real flash ones that cost thousands that the fire guys use to find heat. When they're trying to find people under rubble or hot spots in bushfire situations, that sort of thing. But you get this little thing, it's about that big, and it just clips onto the bottom of your smartphone, and you take a photo of the turf through that. And it's got a little scale on the side which gives you your temperature range, and it color codes it all to, red is really hot down to purple, which is pretty cool. And when you see that, over the years, I've just, for bits of fun, done that. So there's an artificial turf, there's some asphalt car park, there's a golf course, the differences, the differences are unreal in temperature that's being radiated from that surface.
So then in a hot climate, right, or even a hot climate, because like you say, 26 degrees in a place that's not used to it feels hot. I've seen those heat waves from the UK sometimes. They show the photo of the heat wave, and we're looking at going like, that's nice. Like 28, 29, 31. Okay, 31's a little bit warm, but you get used to it, and look at this amazing heat wave we're having in London. But people actually, let's not get so jovial about it, because people do actually die, specifically older people, because there's no air conditioning and there's no temperature regulation or whatever. But you can imagine that in those environments, even when it's not so hot, but especially hot environments, everyone whacks on the aircon. And then how much carbon is that using? How much energy is that using? How much, so how much worse? I mean, paving's just as, asphalt's even worse with the black. But, those things are all contributing to what's the opposite of a heat sink? They're not a heat sink. Big trees and grasses, heat sinks, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then the environmental, the carbons. I mean, get into that whole conversation. There's carbon to produce it, which we were talking about before. Carbon to heat homes and cool homes, I should say, to if you're in that kind of environment.
Mm.
But also, grasses are taking carbon out of the atmosphere
Mm.
and
Yep.
storing it in the soil. A lot of the time through the roots are developing, or you're cutting off a leaf and you're throwing it into a green waste facility that's going to turn it into a mulch or a compost or something like that. Like, it's actually reducing the carbon,
Mm.
whereas AstroTurf's doing nothing for that.
Yeah, we're actually genuinely looking at, and in particular the grasses that you guys have a lot more of over in Aussie. The zoysias, the couch grasses, and the kikuyus. We're actually looking at which ones of those are most, or so I should say, sequester most carbon, because
Right.
a lot of
That's
local
interesting.
authorities, a lot of local authorities now, they want those grasses on their sports parks. They
Yeah.
want those grasses in their civic areas. So there's a kind of a bit of a tipping point now and that comes back to breeding, because now are we actually now going to start? I think we are going to start breeding grasses, warm season grasses in particular, that sequester most carbon. So are they going to have, do they need to therefore be more stoloniferous, have thicker stolons? Um,
Yeah.
do we need to look at how we manage them? Because I know that essentially if you've got a sports field, essentially any sort of aeration or cultural work you do, renovation, that um, that limits or creates carbon. That releases carbon. I'm not using the right terms, but that
Mm.
limits the potential for that surface, that system, to sequester carbon over its lifespan. So they take those events out. So they say, like, this sports field is going to be Bermuda grass, whatever, cultivar, and we're going to have it there for 8 years. Over 8 years, we're planning to renovate it annually. And there's a calculation that the clever people can do that allows for that with the carbon credits. But then the
Mm-hmm.
rest of it is about, we're going to do this many mows, we're going to water this much. It's based on climate and contracts, and then they can say, well, this grass here performs better in terms of its carbon sequestration than this one over here, so we want you to plant this one as a contractor. And that's absolutely happening. I was on a call before Christmas where we were talking with Aussies about that exact thing. And there's studies happening on it on golf courses, sports parks, residential areas. How much can we sequester through berms, in cities and towns? And so it's a big opportunity, definitely, but not none of it's plastic.
No, okay. I wonder. Well, my guess would be that any variety that had a very deep root system
That's it.
would be
Yeah.
storing more carbon, right? So then you would think that's a perfect Venn diagram overlap, because everybody wants deeper roots, because deeper roots make the grass more resilient to hot weather, and healthier, more access to nutrients, probably better at draining water, because you would think that they would absorb some of it. Obviously, like a flood is not going to do
Yep.
much difference. But yeah, all that kind of stuff that's all the things that you got to think about from an entirely holistic standpoint. Like, the grass is removing carbon, the grass is cooling the temperature, the grass is allowing more water flow. There's a lot of things that are not talked about enough, not discussed enough in that kind of in that
Yeah.
conversation there.
Yeah. And I guess where it hurts is where those decisions to go to, say, a synthetic lawn are made purely from a ease of maintenance point of view. And again, I get that a lot of us have very busy lives and might have a dog at home that spends 90% of its day on the lawn, and we don't want
Yeah.
yellow circles everywhere. And I do understand that we don't want to mow. That'll be another comment. They'll say, well, the carbon footprint of mowing a lawn. Well, not now really, because we've got electric mowers, we've got solar mower,
Yeah.
you name it. There's a counter argument to all those claims.
Well, I've thought about this before, because what we do in business, Will, and for those who are listening for the first time, is we run a predominantly residential garden maintenance business. And so we look after, but specifically what we do, because our climate is so adverse, is we do complete lawn care packages that do everything. So we check the sprinklers, we do all sorts of stuff. And obviously the goal is to have a green, lush, beautiful lawn. And a lot of our clients come to us with on the verge of death lawns, lawns that are. So I wonder, as a business, I would think our carbon footprint would be negative. Because, we use a lot of fuel to drive between jobs and to run our equipment and to do all that sort of stuff. I would love to see this, but I don't think as a whole, because I saw this data. I should look this up, but how much CO2 does a lawn remove? It was amazing. How much? I think it was on Charlie Albone's podcast that he talked about CO2 does a lawn remove.
I've seen,
It corrected to say how much CEO does a lawn remove. All the CEOs. A 1,000 square meter area of grass will take up around 1 ton of carbon per year. So 1,000 square meters is probably seven houses equivalent. So 1 ton of carbon. That was just the first result. I don't know what that's. And again, you were just talking about. But I think it was I think Charlie Albone, if I'm correct in saying this, if I'm getting it wrong, still blame Charlie, not me. All right, I don't want to take responsibility for getting anything wrong. But I believe in the podcast that he was talking about that it was like 100 square meter lawn was enough for a family of 4, or maybe it was like a 200 square meter lawn was enough for a family of 4, or something like that, or a household. I can't remember what it was. Anyways. But it was something like that. It was actually a really big effect. And I was thinking, damn, I wonder how much we use and we remove. So, gardening businesses should be on the lowest list of the World Economics Forum's attacks on human beings.
Definitely.
Not to get into all the bloody Paris riots and all that sort of stuff with the farming and the environment. But yes, anyway, you were going to say something.
No, I did I'm trying to do 2 things at once as well. I'm trying to find that. I did a, what would you call it? Like a industry review of what a sports field sequesters a year.
Oh,
that was, and I had to do it. It was for work. But I'm trying to find that because it was quite a good little.
Are you talking about a soccer field? Because that's about
a typical oval or a. Not.
You got to remember, where you're from, a typical oval is about the same. But where we're from, it's like, are you talking AFL? Are you talking Oh no, you do have cricket. So you would have cricket ovals, because there's a big difference between cricket and
True.
What you would call football.
Yes.
I did notice you said soccer before, and I was like, well, you've been in New Zealand long enough.
I've given in.
Yeah. Your family has disowned you, haven't they?
Here we go. The annual contribution of carbon accumulation by the C4, which is warm season grass, was 560 kgs a hectare per year, which is a lot higher than a ryegrass or a cool season grass, which could be around 120 kg. So that's the potential for warm season grasses to almost 5 times as much potential carbon sequestration. And that is exactly like you were saying. That's all about that deeper, the rhizomes. So the roots that go down and the rhizomes also that come up. Yourself, of course, like with warm season grasses, it's woody, almost like kike. It's like almost woody stemmed, isn't it? Yeah, buffalo would be even more. And those grasses have, as is proven there, but they have huge potential to sequester large amounts of carbon. And I just remember that had to be offset. So the question we were asking was, okay, so if we've got a warm season surface, say, and this was kind of with somewhere like Victoria, like Melbourne, say, in mind, and they'll go couch potentially in the summer, and then they'll want to transition out into a ryegrass for the winter. Might be for aesthetics or playability or whatever it might be. Is the issue of transitioning from the couch to the ryegrass, is that almost cancelling out, or the carbon footprint of that process, is that almost cancelling out the benefits? So is that something we need to be aware of, so that then we're starting to develop warm season grasses that have that propensity to be able to just go all year? They may not look
Well, I
beautiful.
tell you what, Will, if you just got your bloody act together and made the ryegrass that can survive in WA conditions, we'd be solved.
It'd be perfect, wouldn't it?
And you'd be a millionaire, probably a billionaire. No, but I get what you're saying. So by verti mowing out or scalping out the couch, and then you would have to do a light top dress, and the process of that would produce carbon. It'd be removing carbon from the site, although that would go to compost typically. It wouldn't go to landfill. So I guess that compost would then still end up in somebody else's soil eventually.
Someone else's, that's where it gets. I suppose that's where it gets really hard to start to calculate those sort of.
I've actually got this. I've got an interesting podcast coming up. There's about 30 minutes from where I am right now. There's a soil and compost commercial manufacturing facility, and they do a lot of the stuff in here. And in about it's next week. Oh, geez, a lot sooner than I thought. Next week, I'm going to drive there and do a tour, and then the CEO of that company is going to come here, and we're going to do a podcast. So I shouldn't say that, because I've had podcasts before. I'm like, I'm going to have this person on to the guest, and then something cancels. But that's the plan. All right. All going well. Eventually it will happen. They're keen. I'm keen. So whether or not it happens next week or not, I don't know. But that's the plan. And their big thing, like what they really are passionate about, is the carbon, getting carbon into the soil, right? And a lot of the food waste and green waste that is, farmers using. I don't know if it's specifically that facility, but they talk about unfit for sale, produce, and using that into soil, and they see that as an environmental thing as well. So I guess you would have to. I'll ask him that question if I remember it, to talk about, hey, like those clippings that you take from contractors like us, or that stuff. That's got carbon in it. Does the process release much carbon? And there's a whole world of questions now.
What sort of information
bringing it up?
And it's interesting as well, because they have people are doing studies on this, and they are measuring it, and it's in years 1 to 2 where a sports field, a couchgrass kikuyu sports field, is going to sequester most of its carbon. After years 2, I guess, and that's just due to the vigor, I would be guessing, of the plant, that annual carbon sequestration rate just starts to drop exponentially. So that's where I guess you could argue, okay, well, if we renovate every other year, every 2 years, we're giving, every time we resurface, we're giving that surface 2 good years at its peak and prime to sequester carbon. Then we're coming in, and like you're going to talk about potentially next week. We're raising clippings and organic matter from the process of renovation. It's got another 2 years to do its sequestering, and then what's happening to that product? Well, if that product that's been, those arisings that have come off that field are going back into composting and going back into home gardens, or what we're building topsoils, and then that's great. But I suppose, is there someone measuring that? It's a really good process. It's a good thing that's happening, but how is that being measured? How is that being tracked?
I wonder if that's another underrated environmental aspect of this industry, like, because I'm thinking, like, for example, there's a lot of green waste. So where for those who are unaware, and maybe I don't know if it's different in the UK and New Zealand or whatever, but in Australia, well, most of Australia, as far as I'm aware, we have like tips, right? And we literally we'll with our green waste. So we'll have an 8x5 trailer, 8x6 trailer full of green waste, and then we would take to tip, we'll dump it out there, and it'll be a mixture for what we mostly lawn clippings for us, but it'll also be branches and
Yep.
weeds that we've pulled and all that sort of stuff. And we dump it there. And I was at the facility on the weekend, and oh man, they probably have enough. I don't know why they hadn't mulched it in ages, but they probably had it, I would say, close to, I would say maybe 2/3 of a soccer field, and the
Right.
pile I would say was about, the gutter height 2.7 to 3 meters high,
Yep.
piled up, bits that are taller, bits that are smaller. So that would be my average. So think of a square that big, and so many trees and this and that. Maybe they had green waste collection recently in a certain area or something, but it's huge. Usually it's not that big. Usually it's maybe the size of the penalty box or something like that. So it was massive amounts, right? And they let that sit for a while, and then they mulch it, and then they have these
Yep.
massive piles of mulch, and then they let that sit for a while, and then you can come and take it for free, and get some free mulch. Now you have to scoop it out yourself, so you're ready for a workout. That's the downfall. So just thinking about all that kind of stuff, and so you've still got the car. It hasn't been burnt. It hasn't been chucked in landfill, and then that mulch ends up getting put typically on someone's garden bed, and then that protects the soil from evaporation, and so even though you're removing, say, carbon, because it gets reused, how much of that is actually lost? It's all these questions we can't answer.
That would be really interesting, because that just builds, but we kind of started, that builds this whole argument toward retaining as much of these natural turf and soil systems that go with them, because the soil system, a turf system, even the most mongrel, shitty lawn out there, it's a 365-day a year ecosystem. It's always, so one of the things that we do
when in areas you get rain, yes,
where you need moisture, yeah.
So that's a bird.
We do quite a lot of already, for the company, quite a lot of microbial soil testing, and and because industry wants to move that way, and that's really good. That's to be encouraged. I think that's a really positive thing, and before you do that testing, you sort of explain to the guys, well, actually, your soil, if it's a golf green or a soccer field, whatever, it actually will inherently be quite a healthy ecosystem, because it's active, because you're constantly mowing, growing, so there's got to be stuff in there that's churning away and keeping things, okay, things can get thatchy, things can get threadbare, and not everything's perfect, but it's actually relatively a pretty important and active system, and that has a immeasurable effect really on areas around it. In your flower beds, you've got trees, root systems from those will benefit from the beneficial bugs and microbes and fungi and bacteria that are, so on and so forth. Well, you lose all that in something that's an artificial system. You all gone. It's worm activity that affects bird life, insects. It just goes on and on.
Here's another thing that was coming up that I was thinking as we're talking about this, and actually no, I won't move on yet, because I did Google about 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes ago. Now you said that how much CO2 does lawn remove? What was that stat again? It was about how many kilograms per hectare did you have?
It was 500. It was about 546 kgs a year, a hectare a year. Yeah,
because so the internet lies, people, because the first result on Google was 1,000 square meters will take 1 ton of carbon. Will take up around 1 ton of. That's incredibly optimistic. Then, and don't ever listen to anything Charlie Albone says, because I googled Australia. How much CO2 does the average Australian household produce? Now we just took the first result from Google as if it was true, and I'm doing it again now. But carbonpositiveaustralia.org.au says that 2.6 people, obviously you got to cut the head off somebody to get that result, has
a
an
bit of
annual carbon footprint. Slicing almost down the middle, but not quite. Slightly across to one side. Average annual carbon footprint of approximately 15 to 20 tons. So there's a lot of CO2 to
yeah.
How much CO2 does a normal person? And the States it's 16 tons. But now I'm not. Average US household produces 7.5 tons per year.
Okay.
So those two things, you can't have an individual creating 16 tons and the average household.
That doesn't line up.
No. So look, I was trying to become more clarified on this, and I've become less clarified.
Google Scholar's the way to go with carbon sequestration.
Okay. I'm going to change my phrasing and see if I get a different result. I did. I got 14 tons. Average Australian generates 14. So that's less than 15 to 20. I'm okay. Look, it's somewhere in that ballpark. So you would have to have a lot of lawn to.
Yeah.
So I'm trusting your results far more than my first Google results. So you still need a lot of lawn to get rid of the carbon.
You do, if based on a hectare. Yeah. So yeah, but I guess that's yeah, I don't know. It's all relative, eh? It's
okay. So here's the sort of problem we're going to solve now, Will. If we got desalination plants, okay, and we lined the Sahara Desert with desalination plants, the carbon that went into watering the Sahara and regreening Sahara, could we regreen and take it out of the atmosphere from turning the Sahara into one massive field of ryegrass?
Big monostand.
What do you?
And then you mow it and you bugger it all up.
You wouldn't even need to top dress because the wind from the other half of the Sahara would top dress it naturally for you.
Definitely wouldn't need a top dress. No, it'd be like a bowling green, eh?
Well, you'd have to level it first. It'd be like the rolling hills of Dover. I wonder I'm sure there's some great YouTubers how much carbon would regreening the Sahara actually get rid of.
Yeah.
So look, anyways, all those sorts of questions, because I'm thinking about that because we got desalination plants in WA, and that's how we compensate for a lot of our lack of water. And I just kind of wonder, how much carbon does it take to run those, and then how much do you actually get back from those? And it's a whole thing, isn't it? I think we've just spent an hour talking about carbon sequestration. Not that I know anything about it either. So, anyways,
it's all good. Yeah,
but it is true, and that's one of the things that you did write about from the on your LinkedIn, which people again jump on Will's LinkedIn. Do you know we hardly even touched? We're an hour and 36 minutes in, and we haven't even touched some of the questions about that I had written down about breeding stuff. So, a few things. Have you got the time? Because okay, you got time because our booking is ending in a minute, technically speaking. But so we're going back to the seed varieties. Let's just reestablish some things. It takes a long time to get them. It's really about the 1%ers, and that lines up with what Joe Rogers and others have said about their turf grass breeding, because they're trying to. It's not in perfect growing conditions. You're going to notice much different. Let's talk about soil and climate in individual specific settings, because here's the problem with what you're not the problem with what you're doing. The challenge with what you're doing is that you can have a few farmers who replicate certain conditions, right? But the world is a big place, and you're selling it to Europe, and you're selling to all these other places. So again, you were like, well, how long you could do a trial for 5 years instead of 3, and you can do it for this, and you can try it in 700 different locations instead of 4 or 8 or whatever it is. So my question is, do you get to a point where you have grasses to match very specific soil types and very specific soil quantities. Sorry, not soil quantities. That's not even what else. Weather conditions.
Yeah.
Um, or is it better to get a variety and change your soil structure to suit the variety that's already there? What would be, where's the future going? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess predominantly, so when in our trials, we conduct trials in sand profiles because
Mm-hmm.
most
Mm-hmm.
sports turf systems are sand for drainage. So sand
Mm-hmm.
wherever they are in the world. So sand and soil. Historically, turf grass breeding has always been conducted in, or generally always been conducted in soil, just because more than anything, it's cost. To be honest, set up
Mm-hmm.
hectares and hectares of sand cap trial areas just isn't feasible.
Mate, just come here. Just come here, get your
Yeah,
bulldozer.
yeah, kind of bad.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you don't need to set
um,
anything up. So honestly, I'm sorry to cut you off here, but they were digging a new electrical pipe in at a school I drive past on my way to work,
yeah,
and what was coming out of this, and it's probably I would say 25 kilometers inland, was pure white beach sand. Like it's
come on.
pure white, and what was on the surface is like browny reddy, and it was
Hmm.
such a contrast. And
That
I
was
was
cool.
like, and I was like, it was, and they were probably, I'd say, a meter deep, a meter and a half deep, digging this access point or whatever it was. So it is proper sand here sometimes. No
What a
patches.
nightmare to trench into that. Oh God.
Fill back in, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
At
yeah,
least there's no rocks though. I would take the soft sand and a few
true.
extra scoops than the rocks. But anyway, so you're saying it's
Yeah,
easier to just to grow in the soil that's already there.
yeah. For trial, like selfishly from a trial point of view, we use soil, but obviously, what tended to happen in the last 50 or so years is guys would say, well, that's all great, that fescue, that might even be like that couch grass, that ryegrass is doing great in soil, but we need to know how it's going to go in sand. The drainage rates are 1,000 mil an hour compared to like 30. um,
Mm-hmm.
all these sort of things, like the temperature's different, the root systems will behave differently. So we started to, as all trial sites do now, develop trials in sand as well, and then
Mm-hmm.
we can compare the two. Um, I would say in sports turf, we are all about manipulating or changing the characteristics of our growing medium wherever we are in the world, rather than breeding turf grasses specifically for those soil types. So, um, like, it's very generalistic to say it, but really, if it's a ryegrass, if it grows well in sand, or it'll grow well in soil. If it grows well in soil, it'll grow well in sand. If it's a good cultivar,
Yes.
by and large, your
Mm-hmm.
management will be the thing that changes. So you'll water more or you'll water less. You'll feed more or feed
Yes.
less.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But then,
yeah.
are you saying then when clay gets involved, that's when you're
Mm.
having the problems?
Clay, yeah. So clay have the best ryegrass cultivar in the world, but drainage, if you haven't got, if your
True.
profile doesn't perform to a minimum acceptable level of drainage, which might be 50, for sports turf, 50 mil an hour infiltration, just putting a reasonably relative number. Yeah, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get the depth of roots. You're not going to get the resilience in the turf surface, and we get that. You get that. You'll get guys that come in and go, well, this latest greatest ryegrass variety that you've bred here, it doesn't do well at my place. And you're like, well, what's your place? Well, it's soil/clay field, heavy loam, we might call it here.
Mm-hmm.
Have you got drainage? No, I got no drainage. Irrigation? Just some pods during the summer. So it's punished all year round, basically. And
Mm.
what's the code? Predominantly it's rugby, and then in summer it's cricket, and the cricketers don't like it because the ball's bouncing across the surface, because it's,
Everywhere. Yeah.
the two worst codes to combine
To mix.
on a
Yeah,
soil.
exactly.
and and you're like, mate, there's no grass on earth that can solve that issue. That issue's literally deeper than what you're growing on the surface. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's about, like I say, yeah, if it in a well managed soil or a well managed sand, if it's a good grass species, it's a good grass species, to a greater or lesser degree. It's more about, how you're coping with the limitations of the soil versus the sand, and the sand versus the soil. Because for some people, sand's a nightmare. I've got to irrigate more. I've got to,
Yeah.
it leaches faster, so I've got to feed more, and it's got more budget on fertilizer, and I've got to spoon feed. I can't just feed a granular every 3 months anymore. That sort of thing, and you get it. Probably the microcosm of that is on a golf course where you've got a guy who's got 6 soil greens and 12 sand greens because the club haven't been able to change over to sand USGA in one go. It just costs too
Yeah,
much
lots of
money.
money, so much money.
Yeah, and he doesn't want to be, or she doesn't want to be managing those 6 greens differently from an agronomic point of view to the other 12. You've got to have a similar program. So you tend to then go, well, what do my sand greens need? And I'm going to manage my soil greens in line with those, and they're just going to be a little bit lusher. There's going to be a bit more grass on those soil greens compared to the sand because I'm putting a little bit more than actually the soil profile needs on those greens. But I will compensate for that with that might be more cultural work like grooming, verticutting, scarification, those sort of things.
Hmm.
Um, so I guess that kind of sums it up quite well. That mixed situation, and we get that a lot with golf courses where you've got sand profiles, soil profiles, and then clay fairways. But fairways will typically be a completely different grass species anyway. But um, so it's about management more than a bespoke type of grass that suits a certain type of soil better than another.
Yeah. So it's too complicated. It's easier to just have a standard of soil, one standard of soil, or one groupings of soils that will suit and modify than is to grow 75, 100 different varieties of ryegrass,
Mm.
because the difference is, at the end of the day, you can't make a ryegrass succeed in insane clay or whatever it is.
Yeah, no,
Use rye
you're
as the
setting it
example.
up to fail, kind of thing. Yeah,
At
yeah,
yeah, at some point you're going to have problems that you just can't solve.
yeah.
Um, so then moving from that, you recently, or I don't know how recently it was, but you worked on this stadium, and I've seen some photos and stuff of the soil there. So this is the perfect thing for anybody to talk about. There's some for anybody who's looking at lawn, installing their own lawn, to talk about, because I've seen a photo of Optus Stadium in Perth,
Mm,
and I think you're a perfect person to answer this question. Optus Stadium in Perth has a white sand base, and I know that because when they do, they remove the pitch and they bring the pitch back in, the drop in
mm,
pitches. They have this
mm,
the cutout of the ground, and you can
mm,
see your stadium was like black, dark
mm,
brown. The
mm,
soil quality. So you go from the super white sand to
mm,
real rich color. And the word that's being used is biochar. And I don't
mm,
even know what biochar is. So I guess there's two questions there. One is, why would one stadium go for pure sand? I know it's drainage, right? Like, I
mm,
know
mm,
that's why. But why then wouldn't everybody go why are you using this? Why did you go for biochar? And then what even is it?
mm. Okay, yeah. So, I suppose the main dictating single biggest factor of why one stadium or one venue chooses a sand type over another is what's local. So, um, here in New Zealand, Northland, right up far north of the North Island, they'll be using predominantly what we would call a dune sand, which is what it
Mm-hmm.
is. It's dunes. It's it's mined. There's guys with consents that can mine that from the dunes, back dunes,
Yep.
and that's what they use. So really ultra fine,
Mm-hmm.
which is all good as long as you're putting it in at a depth of over say 100, 150 mil. If it's too shallow, then it starts to cap and you start getting issues with surface infiltration. But that's a different thing. So they're using dune sand. Down here, we use what we've got most available, which is typically like a river sand. We do have some dune sands, but typically say a river dredge sand, which is usually a lot coarser.
Of course, so yeah.
yeah, and a different color altogether. So the dune sand's usually like a nice gold, not
Hmm.
like your white sand at Optus. I know what you mean at Optus,
Hmm.
but and that might be if it normally the white sands are derived coral derived sand. So it's obviously over millennia. You know, that's where the sand source that um,
Yeah.
aggregate sources come from. So in a river, it's pebbles, it's rocks, it's grinding down, so they're grey in colour. So the sand tends to be quite grey and dull in colour, coarser. Um, if it's coarser, we've got a whole bunch of other issues to consider, and this is where the biochar bit comes in. So we've got very fast infiltration rates to consider, drought, so a propensity for that profile to be very drought prone because the
Yes.
gaps, particle size, in between all the particles is that much greater.
So
So,
the
water,
water would flow through so quickly
yeah,
that
yeah,
as soon as you have hot weather, it's just baked and it's gone.
yes,
There's nothing
yeah,
being
yeah,
held on to.
exactly, exactly. So down in the south, by and large, the further south we go, the more we have those sort of droughty, quite, I would sort of describe them inconsistent sands. They're not ideal. They're not ideal for turf.
Hmm.
Um, one way so I went down the rabbit hole of biochar about 6 years ago. I was just having a normal day, and this guy rocks in who I now know is one of the biochar producers or suppliers, I should say, in New Zealand.
Yep.
Real, just local farmer, really nice guy. And he's like, "Have you ever thought of using biochar in your sand profiles for sports fields?" I noticed that I go around Auckland and all these sports fields are being built in sand, and I'm just seeing water shortages and issues with water availability. And you're building sports fields in sand, and I might be being naive, but it doesn't add up. And I'm like, no,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
not being naive. It is a downside. And so we had a chat, and he left some product, and he wasn't really selling it. He does supply it, but it was more out of he's an interested guy. He's
Curious.
passionate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I learned an awful lot from him over the next couple of years. Put in a load of trials, different depths of biochar, different amendment rates, and the whole outcome we were trying to get to was we still had a sand profile that drained at an acceptable rate for a high performing sports field surface, so like a stadium field, um,
Yep.
which might be around 100, 200 mil an hour. Yeah, so it's fast. It's faster than we
Oh,
need at home.
huge.
Um, and yeah, and this is Yarrow Stadium. So, but had the biochar being amended through that sand was offering um, some, and it got to be careful the words you use, but a retention property. So it wasn't
Sure.
it wasn't really slowing down the infiltration of water through that profile enough to cause any detrimental effect on the performance of the surface, but it was slowing it down enough to be able to allow the plant, the grass, to grab hold of, to benefit from some of those nutrients that are going into that surface, whether that's through fertilizer, um, wetting agents, irrigation. It's not just bypassing the plant, going right the way through the profile, and you're ending up with one a drought prone stadium surface
Hmm.
as this could have been, and two, a very expensive surface to maintain because you're having to pump it full of nutrients and water in order just to chase your tail to keep it sustained. So where our trials led us over a period of years was to and this is kind of generalizing it, but here at Yarrow we had say, this is from memory now, but maybe 90 mil deep sand profile, pure sand,
Yep.
maybe 90,
Yep.
100 mil deep. We want that because we're not looking for roots to be in the top 100 mil. We want them deeper than that. So then once you get down below that 90, 100 mil, we were then amending the sand through that zone. It was about 50 mil deep with biochar. And that biochar was amended in at, I think it was something like 7-10% rate.
Oh,
And our
okay.
trials showed us that, yeah, not high, but if you went much higher than say 10%, you weren't doing any harm, but you weren't getting any more bang for bucks than if you went at like 7 to 10%. That was the golden And then if you
Mhm.
went lower than 7.5%, you weren't getting enough benefit, so it wasn't actually worth doing. So we
Mhm.
kind of figured out that 10 to 15%, or that 7 to 15% was the golden kind of range. That's by volume. So we amend that in, let's say 10% by volume, and the contractor who built that field, that's what they did. Layer that in. So I'm kind of going the wrong way around. So put your
I
gravel
get what you
raft
mean,
in,
though.
yeah, put your
Yeah,
biochar layer in, and then put your sand profile on top of that. And then the theory is that the turf roots establish,
at the bottom.
find,
Yeah.
yeah, find the goodness, if you like, of that the biochar amended layer is offering, and that's where they want to stay. So you're not suffering then from this, because we all get this almost reduction, the shrinking of root systems past growing. During growing and establishment, the grass will just root for Africa. It's just down. That's a bad terminology as well. But it'll
Uh,
just,
Back with the
it'll just,
inbreeding again.
yeah, it'll just keep going down, and it's not an issue. But then once we slow down with the inputs, because we've got the turf surface we want, the roots start coming back up, and that's where we have the risk of having a drought tolerant or non-resilient, if you like, turf
Yes.
system in sand. This is mostly for sand. So and the theory has been backed up in the instances where we've used it with the reality, and it's working well as a system, and it's absolutely applicable for residential high end, you'd say, but residential turf systems as well. There's a landscaper that like yourself, we caught up via LinkedIn. There was a local landscaper,
Mhm.
um, and he put in a 400 square meter lawn just based on that design. He didn't have the drainage or anything, but he had that
Yeah.
biochar amendment going through the base of the profile up into sand, and they used a tall fescue. And the only thing you've got to be careful of with biochar is it has, because it grabs, and this is kind of trying, in the simplest terms,
Grabs
it
the
grabs
water.
moisture, it grabs
Yep.
nutrient. In that first year or year to 18 months, there's a chance that it will also grab, hold, and not release the nutrient that you need to sustain the turf. So
Uh,
you can get yellowing. You can, we've seen that suddenly in trials. You're like, shit, it's going yellow. It looks really
it's
weak.
hungry.
Um, and that, yeah, it's hungry. That's all it is. It's hungry. So in that first, you ideally you activate it. So I did, and by activating, that's down to your supplier. That's ideally they've left that biochar product, that raw product, out in their yard to weather, to go through a winter, a wetting and a drying cycle. As it does that, the beneficial microbes start to colonize all those little pores that are in there, because it's just full of pores. That's how it retains moisture. Um, and then you can apply it with something like, oh, poultry manure, very small amount, or we have a product here. It's a product name called BioBoost, which comes from sheep pellets. I think is derived from that, or
Yeah,
some
so
sort
like
of
a
organic
pelletized
fur.
organic fertilizer. Yep.
Yeah, that's perfect. If you can do that, that's and most of our grow-ins we do with that now in New Zealand. We use like a BioBoost product to go on initially, along with a DAP, the traditional sort of synthetic products. So that helps to activate the biochar, and so you might get a little, but you don't get so much of that noticeable chlorosis, that yellowing.
Yes.
And that sounds a lot more dramatic than it actually is. But if you're looking for perfection,
Yes,
you don't
in
want
a
it.
stadium, probably home
Yeah,
lawns. So basically,
yeah.
by doing so, if I can just simplify that whole thing,
Mm.
basically the biochar. Actually, I've got a definition of biochar. I should read out. Biochar is a charcoal-like substance that is made by burning organic material from agricultural and forestry wastes.
Hmm.
It is in a controlled process called pyrolysis.
That's it.
Say
Yep.
it fast and confident, and no one can question you. Uh,
That's
Although it looks like a lot like common charcoal, biochar is produced using a specific process to reduce contamination and safely store carbon. So it's kind
Yep.
of like a charcoaly sort of thing.
Yep.
So you couldn't just burn some sticks in your backyard and throw them underneath.
Not really. No, no. It's so that pyrolysis is, and I struggle with that word too. It's burning. to be specific, it's burning at about 460 degrees C in the absence of oxygen. So they use these big furnaces. They're pretty.
Right.
They do a lot of it on a commercial scale around the
Hmm.
world, and it's full on. It's like it's a big investment up front. Um, so you're trying to burn at a very controlled, or you're burning at a very controlled temperature, 450, 460 degrees C, and you're trying to eliminate as much of the oxygen in that burning process as possible. So when you're burning a fire, that's not the case.
No.
And then all that does is lock in. So a good quality biochar will be about 80% carbon. And when you run it through your hands and it clinkers. It's like it's tiny, it's like 2 to 4 mil size granules, but they clinker. And the more you can hear that clinker, the better, generally, the better quality that
Right.
biochar is. Um, so that there's not one single type of biochar is the same. You get biochars that are made from organic feedstock. They call it feedstock. That's just what they use to make the char. So
Hmm.
that might be, in this instance, the biochar we used at Yarrow Stadium there was from forestry in Rotorua, central North Island of New Zealand. It's a byproduct. So they strip the pine trees down. They make timber for housing structures. And a byproduct of that stripping is what they then burn to produce energy for their industrial plant where they're processing all the timber. And a really good byproduct of that, which we've only kind of recently just become aware of with this move towards biochar, is biochar. And that biochar is certified organic because that's a
Hmm.
non-treated feedstock. So if you start using tannalized wood or treated wood, there can be
Yes.
issues because there could be buildup of metals, um, pesticides, all sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
There could be issues in that. So ideally, you can make biochar in your backyard, absolutely, but and all you really need is a bin. Really, like a big one of those big metal dustbins, like the
Okay. A metal
with a lid.
dustbin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you YouTube it, there's heaps of Americans that just like it's quite redneck,
Oh, so
but
is you? Oh man, I'm into this though because
yeah,
you're solving all my problems with drainage. Uh,
it's absolutely and for sand in Perth, oh,
yeah.
it's made for it. Eh?
But
It
what
would
I'm
be
thinking
made for.
is, we've got. I don't know if you've seen, but we've got like a walk behind cam driven aerator. Right,
Hmm.
so it goes probably 8 centimeters deep. It can get to 10 centimeters if it's nice and soft, right? But it's 7, 8 centimeters is normal. And what
Hmm.
we've been doing, this CEO of this company that with the compost and stuff, is we've been. And it's very expensive to do. We'll aerate, try and remove the cores, which is harder than you would think when it's sand because they don't usually hold together too well. Remove as much as we can, then we'll top dress with an organic top dress,
Hmm.
right?
Cool.
I've heard about problems with top dressing organic straight on top of sand because of like a black layer, and you kind of want to mix it in if you possibly could, but that's the best we can do to get something down. And we've had some clients, I can think of one that's not far down the road, that we were having so much troubles with the fertilizer. Like it just wasn't responding well to it. Like you would get some response, but you wouldn't. Um, it wouldn't last. It was probably leaching through. There might have been a pH issue or whatever. And one day, this client had been with us for ages, many, many years. And I just go, do you know what? I'm going to, for free, do this service for them because I know they don't have the budget and I'm really curious to see if this will work.
Mm.
So I just did it for them. And, I did it on my own. So I wasn't paying employees. And I was probably about $200 worth of product. And I was like, cool, this is a $200 experiment for me. And it
Hmm.
worked really, really well. But the labor to top dress is so hard, blah, blah, blah. This biochar stuff, because you're only talking like 7%,
Mm.
right? Could I, in theory, get like a nice big bag and poke a hole in it? Because you're talking about small mills
Mm.
and cover like go and individually place in holes this biochar. Be super time consuming, right? But
Yeah, yeah, drill and
um,
fill. Mm.
instead of treating it like a top dress, because another thing, like you in that video I put up, I think I backed out of it, but you had the soil sampler, which you take a hole
Mm.
out. We've actually got a client who's got a dry spot that is just rapidly dries all the time, and we literally took our soil sampler and took 10, 15 holes out. It wasn't as thick as yours, but maybe, I don't know, thick enough hole.
Yeah.
And then we filled it with compost to have some water retain there. So in those sorts of scenarios where you're having a real problem, would you see that as a viable offer to solve a drainage problem, to help hold nutrients, like for a homeowner to do?
Definitely. Yeah. No, definitely, without a
See,
doubt. And it's the great thing is as well. Like I guess it's different if you, but no, even on a private scale, but on this commercial scale, this is a waste product that you're finding a useful,
yeah,
and so
epic.
that's awesome. It's a circular thing. It's like,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then
How good.
and the guy that produced it, he actually had a bespoke, because the avocado growers over here are going nuts for it. So he actually has
Oh,
a
wow.
sort of bespoke blend where he goes a third biochar, a third poultry manure. He gets that, so and they're all waste products, and a third lime. The lime is a byproduct of sugar.
Like
Um,
citrus.
yeah,
It
sugar
just
refinery.
it didn't taste nice, so we did put a little lime on it.
A little bit of
Make the
lime on it. Yeah,
avocados. You're making the guac already in the avocado. You're putting the lime in there already. No, I'm joking. I know what you mean by lime, not that lime.
yeah, what I mean. Yeah, the white boring stuff, and then and so he mixed that a third with the poultry manure, and the idea of the poultry manure is, like I say, it activates the biochar. That was just otherwise going to be chucked away. It's like the scrapings, if you like, from the hen houses, and then the biochar, which is a waste product of the furnacing that this company, they're called Red Stag, use to power and generate their industrial site. So 3 waste products combined, and it's like awesome for the soil, awesome for plants.
Yeah, man, come
Seventy
on.
percent,
I love that.
70% retention of moisture. Yeah,
That's what I
compared.
love, because that's the sort of stuff. Because, and I was actually, had on the list to ask you this. This is a nice natural transition. Fertilizers, right? Because
Mm,
what we do, right, right behind me, I have a whole, this racking unit I was telling you about. I've got what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've probably got about maybe 16. No, a lot of them are pretty close to empty bottles
mm,
of, one's a nitrogen product, iron, 4 different varieties of wetting agent because of our soils, kelp,
mm,
other organic things. And look, they work and they're great. And I love them. They're actually we have a sponsor called the Lawn Shed that sells all this sort of stuff. And then underneath that, I've got, 100 SGN, like fertilizers, 200, 300 SGN. I've got some
mhm,
organic pelletized I've got all this product, right?
mm,
And this is what people get us to do, because they've, over here, that yellow sand you're talking about, that's what most of our houses are built on, bricky sand. And
mhm,
they don't do any soil preparation. So we've got to compensate, and we don't really have an option. But fertilizers are not great for soil, and they're not really
mm,
great for microbes, and it's an expensive long-term solution. And I totally see it as a viable short-term thing.
mm,
So as an agronomist, and you're doing all these studies, I know a lot of your studies are completely unfed, right? Because you're trying
mm,
to just see it in a natural position. How do you think about fertilizer? How do you think? Because, like, let's take out the stadium world where it's needed because of the wear and tear. Golf
mm,
courses, okay. In more of a home lawn, local park scenario,
mm,
this is the battle that we've got in our head, right? Do we go down the very expensive in the short term, kind of, we can't rip out and restart. That's not an option. But top dressing with organics, doing that, you know, quarterly or something stupid, just to try and get, like, can you get to a place? Okay, I guess here's the question. Can you get to a place where your soil is so good you can get pretty much stadium quality color, not the evenness of the color over a hectare, but that beautiful health and everything, with just amazing quality soil? Or are the standards that we're looking for in lawn so high now that you will need some sort of iron or even just a small amount to hit to give it something, because that's what goes on in my head. The environmental side, I do care about. I'm not super greeny, but then the quality, and that's the balance I'm trying to work out. That was a long question, but you get the idea.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of that is expectation. I think, yeah, you can absolutely. I'll put it this way: our last place, I had a big backyard, big section. It was a mongrel lawn, mostly kikuyu,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't about to turn it into anything special because got kids, got dogs, it's just no point. It's a yard. It's just. But I wanted good, healthy, robust grass cover on it as much of the
Mm-hmm.
year as possible.
Yep.
So I actually did that one day, and it took a whole day with a ute and a trailer of exactly that. I was like, right, I'm going to cover this in biochar. And then I'm going
Right.
to put organic.
Awesome.
I'm going to put it was the blend. It was the lime, the poultry manure, and the
Yes.
biochar. I'm going to do it.
Yep.
So did it. Unfortunately, everyone has to stay off it for quite a while until the rain washes in on the carbon. Otherwise, you get black footprints through the house.
Oh, okay. Yep.
But that's just a practicality. And I'm not joking. We weren't there for long. We were there for about 4 years. I did that in the first year. For 3 years, I didn't need to apply. I would never have dreamt of applying any sort of fert to that lawn because I
Right.
couldn't. I'd have had to just mow more. It was absolutely looking after itself. Um,
Now, what
that's in
soil that
soil.
you had? Yeah, you had soil originally,
Yeah,
so there's
it
probably
was a
something
shitty
in
soil.
there. So if you
Yeah.
take a full sand profile, and I'm not lying that this is 100%. I mean, I should send you some photos, but like a lot of the Perth area they build on is either former sand pits, like we talked about. You dig down, that's all it is, or it was like a swamp, and so they bring in the sand for drainage anyway, and they
Mm,
have parks and lakes to drain it all too. So there's no, well, that's not true, but I would say 95% of Perth's suburban area is a full sand base, except for the more
yep.
mature areas where they've had time. So you're literally dealing with that. So what would you do? Let's say money's not an object and money is tight. What are you thinking
Mm.
with that? And how could you use biochar in those scenarios?
So in that sense, I'd be thinking the same. I'd be thinking I need to get something in there. So whether that's through cultivation or what I did at home that time was just layered the stuff on and let Mother Nature wash it in. It takes a lot
Mm-hmm.
longer, but it will happen. Um, that would be step one. You've got to give it some guts. You've got to give it, you've got to give that, especially sand, you've got to give it something to be able to, in some way, sustain
Yeah.
decent year-round plant growth. And then after that, people go, "Oh, then I've got to apply it next year." And next year, it's like, no, you don't. You don't. Once you've got enough of, like I did, you've got enough of that biochar in there and amending naturally through the profile, you could sustain a reasonable level of grass cover through annual or biannual spring autumn applications of a good sort of organic type seaweed sheep poo type fertilizer. If you know,
Sure.
I don't know what sort of products you've got over there, but I'm assuming you've got stuff similar to us in like pelletized.
Yep.
Just a real something that's going to gradually year on year bring up the CEC of that profile,
Yeah.
and then if so that would be like a fundamental lawn care program, say in a sandy profile.
Mm-hmm.
And how long you have to do that for, or how frequently you have to do that for, in terms of the organic amendment, will depend on you, what you're happy with, situation. I don't know. It might be
Mm.
2, 3, 4 years. I don't know. And then that will get you. I believe that would get you a level of decent lawn.
Mm-hmm.
If you want finesse and refinement over and above that, that's when you get your synthetic products into program, and that's when it starts getting expensive potentially. But that's where, to get that, that extra level of quality, then I don't believe we're there yet where we could go 100% organic and achieve something equivalent to a real high-end lawn or sports surface. We just can't.
Mm.
But what I sort of say to the stadiums is, the theory behind the biochar side of things is, you're going to be able to peel back over time on the amount of synthetics you have to put in, or need to, or feel that you need to put in to get to where you want to be. Your bar's just that much higher. Or I should say, your baseline's that much
Yes,
higher
I know
from
what
the
you mean.
start.
You're starting from a
Yeah,
better starting point.
and you're going to get more bang for buck from those products you put on. So we know we need those products. They're not always the cheapest. That's fine. There's a lot of research and stuff that goes into developing them. Accept that. But if we can put them into a more active, higher CEC, cation exchange capacity, like a profile that can
Yeah.
retain more of what we're giving it, we're going to get more bang for buck when we do make the cost, or we do outlay the money to put those products down. So, yeah, I guess it's in your situation, you can raise that baseline before you start spending too much money chasing something you're never really going to be able to sustain purely through synthetic fertilizer applications on a sand profile. Yeah.
Right. So let's getting real practical here. If I was to just top dress, would that biochar seep in to the lower points that you would? So when you were building your green, not the green, the stadium, you had the gravel, then you had the biochar mix at what was it, 7 to 10%, and
Yeah,
then
I think it was
you
10,
had sand on top of it because you wanted the sand to drain, and I guess at the bottom of the roots where the nutrient to be, encourage the roots to go deep. So if we did that backwards and we just put biochar on top of the lawn, yeah, it would benefit, but would it be exponentially better to manually get it deep somehow?
Yeah, it would.
Okay.
Yeah. So some of the golf courses that are using it, they're not about to dig up their greens, so they're tining, they're verti-draining, and then they're backfilling, if you like, with a biochar sand mix, because they don't want to just get these solid columns of biochar in. They want to, so it might be like 70-30, like 70% sand, 30% biochar, pushing that into those channels, sweeping that in, and then in another 6 months they'll do it again, and another 6 months they'll do it again, and then it's just like pulling a whole cup to see, well, where are we at with that? Like, it's not like an exact science. It'll be different for every soil type. It'll be different regarding the rate of biochar you can put in at any one time. The risk, or the negative of top dressing pure biochar time and time again in big volumes on a surface and waiting for that to sort of precipitate down through naturally is it will do over time, but there'll be a period of time where you have a bit of a layering effect on the surface.
Yes.
And that's, I mean, it's fine. It's just that you're going to end up with, well, you don't get rain. So, but where we get rain, you get that pugginess.
We get rain in winter.
Right.
In winter, the rain situation is fine. So, yeah.
Right. So you might, depending on your tolerance for having some carbon coming back up through the turf, that may not be ideal in some domestic situations in particular.
So, because it'd be dirty. So if I was to take, well, we talked about the aerator and the pluggers and things like that. So if you it's easy in a hotspot like we had this, because this client's the hotspot we're talking about might be the size of a dining table, so 15 to 20 holes in there they're quite close together. And my thinking, and it's a bit of an experiment, but my thinking is that the retentive, is that a word?
Yeah.
The retentive capacities, again, I'm pretending to be smart, using big words, but the ability for those composts, or the compost, to retain the moisture. My thinking is, as long as the holes are closer together with a turf like it's cooch, right? So the root system would hold water there, and I guess the soil directly around it would hold a little bit more moisture due to that. And then you would get dry spots in between. But as long as those holes were close enough together, it should kind of solve that problem. And then the hope is, over time, that kind of, you get the worms and you get things like that, and then it fixes the whole spot. That was my thinking with that area. I'm thinking about all my clients now. How do we get biochar into them? Because aerating and top dressing is just going to make a mess because it doesn't hold it. So I'm wondering if, Have you seen those pro pluggers that are like maybe, about this big or whatever? For those listening, maybe the size of a big coffee mug thickness
Mm-hmm.
or in diameter. And you can take out a plug, and then you might use it where you would have, say, a small bit of damage, and you can then take from a nursery or from a different part of your lawn and
Mm-hmm.
replace it. If you were to do that size and just fill the hole with biochar and the manure and the lime and just fill it, so then you've got dozens of black holes over a 30. Well, you need more than dozens, but you have got lots of them. Could that work? And would you need spacing every meter, every 30 centimeters? I know you haven't done this. I'll make it up as we go. But
Yeah, no, I haven't.
I'm trying to think
Yeah.
about ways, because then you would, you could put some sand on top to fill in, I guess, some of the literal gaps between it. And then maybe you don't see it anymore. And maybe what happens is every bloody summer you have green spots.
Yeah, I think you'd have that for a while, depending on your patience level. Over time, it will move, because it's not, it's an organic material, so it will move through the soil, especially a sand. It will move over winters with the rain, and but I think initially, I haven't ever tried that. I mean, probably a better way would be not going pure product and, in a wheelbarrow or cement mixer or whatever, or even just in a pile, just blending it in with some of your, so maybe like 30-40%, roughly, of your sand that you've got there existing. So it's a mix, so it's a bit like a potting mix, so it's not just that product, and that would soften the potential for that, exactly like you say, that kind of real, almost mottling that you're likely to get on the surface. That would soften that, and and just allow you a bit more time to let those products do their thing in the soil profile. And look, I'm guessing it may take 45 years.
45 years.
No, 4 to 5.
I know that's what you said. It sounded like
45.
I don't know if I'm going to be alive then. Oh dear.
And I don't know. Yeah, the closer you are. I mean, it goes on the principle of that golf course I was talking about, where they were verti draining, or they were aerating and then backfilling. So those were probably, like, on average 10 centimeters apart ish, those channels. And he did that for 3 seasons, so twice a year for 3 years, and he's got to a point now where he's like, I'm happy now. I feel my profile is amended.
Well,
but
I'm going to have to. I've got one more question. I'm going to have to wrap this up, because I've got a commitment in 17 minutes. Actually, probably I've got to leave before that. But I could keep talking about this for ages, because I seem like this is the secret sauce I've been missing. So I don't know. We can talk about this later. But the one last question I did allude to this before, was about water. And I had somebody ask me, and I said I would ask you, so I can't end this podcast without asking. They said to me, so to set up the context for those who weren't talking before, obviously in Perth, we've been using a lot of scheme water, and scheme water is treated to be drinkable and not carry diseases and all sort of stuff. We do notice that when it rains, the rain is better. The rain is better for everything. And part of that, which I clearly know, or is clearly known by a lot of gardeners, is that rainwater carries a certain amount of nitrogen in it. And I believe, to have this be a nice quick answer, I believe that the nitrogen is from storms, or is more in storms when there's lightning and things like that. All right.
Definitely. Yeah.
However, so we know rainwater is good. However, is the chlorine and the other things that they put into water to make it drinkable, is that also negative at certain quantities for plants, specifically lawns?
Yeah. Yes, potentially, definitely. Chlorine, sodium, depending on the pH as well. The pH of the water Oh, look, that varies, doesn't it? I mean, the pH of the water here where we are now, it's really hard water. Like you feel it, you feel it, you shower and you feel tight. The skin feels tight after being in the shower.
Yes.
Things
Is that
calc up
acidic?
really quick. No, that's more alkaline. So there's
Okay.
more, so there's like, yeah. So actually that's probably, uh, oh no, you see, you can't say that's probably a better thing than being the other way. But at the same time, if the
So
pH becomes too
certain
high,
plants like acidity,
yep,
rhododendrons, azaleas, that
yep,
sort of stuff.
yep, you'll lock up nutrients. So chlorine definitely, fluoride definitely, um, oxygen as well. The amount of oxygen in the water. So I don't know if you've seen those, but they invent these hose ends now, and they use them a lot in golf, where it's essentially it's forcing the water through a series of tiny, tiny holes. So through a small
Oh.
gap, tiny, tiny holes, and they call it nano bubbles. They call them nano bubbles,
I
and
just
all
thought
you're
I
doing
have that, but I just thought it was my host getting old and brittle.
well,
I didn't
might
didn't
be
know
doing it
that. It's
for
like
you.
it's for thousands of dollars worth of technology I've just invented.
Yeah,
No, I
ahead
get
of
what
the
you mean.
time. Yeah,
Anyway,
no,
so
and it's just oxygenating the water. And again, you don't get that the rainfall that falls out of the sky has a lot. I don't know the volumes, but has a lot higher oxygen
oxygen,
content.
right?
So that makes all the nutrient it carries as well far more accessible and instantly, if you like, accessible to the plant. So
Right.
absolutely, like there's no doubt about it. Golf courses that'll irrigate using mains or town supply, they're getting few and far between now. But we can have major issues with accumulation of chloride and sodium with some of those golf courses, depending on the quality of the town supply, compared to aquifer or freshwater bore sources, which could be of a high quality and are just not treated with those chemicals. So it's yeah, absolutely.
Well, you're
Yeah.
just killing me, man, because we only have that water. We don't have rain. What else am I supposed to do? Just consign me to death. All right. No, that's fine.
Stick it stick it through a carbon stick it through a biochar filter on the end of your hose before you water your plants, and
Biochar is
it's
the answer to all of my questions here. All right. I hadn't heard of it until I'll be honest with you. Like I saw, look, I'm gonna wrap this up in a minute, but I saw your stuff on LinkedIn. I thought this could potentially be a good conversation. And there's a lot of people like this who I've never talked to before, and it's always a risk because you're like, you could be a douchebag, you could be using Chat GPT to write all your LinkedIn posts, and you actually
true.
know nothing. And in that
True.
research, when I was preparing for it, I saw the biochar, and I was like, oh, that sounds like an interesting conversation. Now I think you've solved all my life's problems. You've restored my marriage. My dad is now proud of me again. Like I can eat KFC and not gain weight. Like, thank you. You solved everything. I was like, oh, but look, I'm literally gonna be like Googling after this, and I'm gonna try and work out how the hell do I get biochar deep into the soil without obviously
Too
ripping
much
everything
work.
up and starting
Yeah.
again, and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so look, that was fascinating. I've got to end this, but thank you so much for coming on, Will. And I had a lot of fun, and we can forgive you
Yep.
for being from the UK and New Zealand and coming on an Australian podcast. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. But anyways, I had fun. Thank you so much for coming on. And everybody, jump on Will's LinkedIn. How do I spell your name? There's nothing secret about it. Will, Bowden. Anything else you want to say,
That's
Will?
it. No, just buy your seed from PGG Wrightson.
Exactly.
Sorry.
Right. And they export to Europe. I'm sure you export to Australia as well.
Oh, we've got Australia. Yep, they're in all around, but we've got a big depot, if you like. That doesn't do it justice, but in Melbourne. But yeah, all around Australia. Yep, absolutely.
Well, about 94% or 95% of listeners are in Australia, but about 3% are in New Zealand. So the next big chunk. And then it's just random. And there's just random countries after that, like Pakistan and England and America, and South Africa. But anyway, so all you New Zealanders, all you 3% or so, there's actually more people who identify apparently as non-binary than there are people who listen.
All right.
I know it's weird. I wonder if it's just people who haven't clicked the icon. And anyways, let's not get into that. Let's end this podcast. Thank you for listening, and everybody, I'll see you in the next before we get cancelled.
Cheers. Thank you.